I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, degenerate sleuths of the night. We gather to boldly go where others have refused. Welcome to the DT show, you salty mofos.
A man accused of killing 4 college students is behind bars, and he has ties to northeastern and central Pennsylvania. State police say 28-year-old Brian Cobberger was arrested this morning at a home in Chestnut Hill Township.
I can't find any case law that would support that idea. That somehow a warrant would be needed for DNA left at a crime scene.
We are expecting to learn more about the allegations against the girlfriend of a Boston police officer who was found unresponsive in the snow Saturday morning. I-Team sources say Karen Reed was in a relationship with John O'Keefe. She's facing charges including motor vehicle homicide and manslaughter.
So, the Commonwealth just provided the court with information that causes me grave concern. The implications of that information may have profound effects on this defense and defense counsel.
So, get your popcorn ready and your choice of drink. Get your butt on your seat. Like, comment, and subscribe for a treat. Here we go. It's time for the show. The Drunk Turkey Show.
And here we are. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DT Show. I'm Daniel, your host. We have a great show for you guys tonight. I got a special guest. My buddy Kevin from the Yellow Cottage Tales is going to be joining us here in a second. But before we bring him on and before we get into the content of today's show, I want to remind you guys of our partnership with DataSeal. If you have any concerns, whether it's your information being out there on the interwebs, whether it's your name, address, phone number, date of birth, religious preference, voting preference, I know that's important to some of you guys. Make sure you check out DataSeal. You get a 5% discount. Link is in the description. Also, guys, wanted to take this time to remind everybody that we do have a merchandise store. It is at Bonfire. Link is also in the description, but I'll go ahead and show this up to you guys real fast. We have the Drunk Turkey merchandise. You have the Drunk Turkey Chef apron for those who want to use that for whatever reason. You want my face when you cook, I'll be there. The DTS hats, the Salty Mofo shirt, Don't Be a Pro Burger coffee mug, the Things of That Nature t-shirt, DTS, Drunk Turkey Show. You got all your stuff there. And lastly, I want to let you guys know that we have a new gaming channel. Link is also in the description. It's also pinned in the comment section. If you guys would do me a favor, go subscribe out there. You'll hear some familiar voices. You might hear some of my buddies that have been on the show before who haven't been on in a while. You might hear my buddy Blue. You might hear my buddy Hyman. Blue don't come on often, but Hyman sure does. So make sure you guys go and check that. And without further ado, let's bring today's guest onto the show. We have Kevin from the Yellow Cottage Tales. Cottage Tales. Yeah, I did say it right. Yellow Cottage Tales. I said it wrong earlier when I was talking about it.
You're making me look bad with those intros, Daniel. Man, come on, brother. You got a great intro there, and up to date. You got Judge Canoni in there and everything. Man, you're putting pressure on me.
Well, I had to update it. I had just the Brian Cobberger stuff. I'm talking Karen Reed as well. That case is coming up. It's in the limelight right now. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It pumped you up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now I got to go out. I started working on a new one today, but I was going to make it really simple. I just got some images. I put a countdown clock, and try to. Now I'm like, man, he's putting pressure on me. I got to up my game somehow, and I got to spend some time editing this thing.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it took me a full day. I mean, it's only like two minutes and 20 seconds, but when it comes to like the editing and stuff, most people don't know it takes takes hours just for 2 minutes. I think that's why it takes like almost a year for a full movie. But
Oh yeah.
maybe I'll dabble into that one day. We'll see. Well, welcome back to the channel. Before we start, I want to let everybody know it's also in the description, the link there for your book, The Storm of Suspicion. Tell me about it. I've had yourself. I've had a couple of authors like Howard Bloom on the channel. Is this your first book?
This is my first published book. Yes, I've had completed a novel a few years ago. After I was first diagnosed with a significant disease, I set out. I had several partially written novels. When I say partially, like a substantial amount of work done, but not complete. And I said, you know what? I'm going to actually start out with a fresh concept and finish a novel. And I did within a year, but was not able to get a publisher for it. So it didn't look too hard, but part of me is like, man, no publisher, especially in this environment, wants a white dude in his 50s. And so I just kind of got discouraged. That's kind of why I formed my channel. I was like, I got to find some other way to tell my stories.
Well, I mean, you could always change your name and a bunch of different things on those books. You know, what is it called? A pseudonym? Is that correct?
Yeah, but by law, when you send a publisher the manuscript, you have to put on the top left-hand corner your real name.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Food for thought, because I might be in the process of dabbling into writing something myself. Keep tuned for that, guys. Keep tuned for that. It may or may not happen. I've started it, but we'll see. We'll see. But what is this book about? I mean, obviously it's the Karen Read case. Did this book, when did you start writing it? Was it before the last trial, after the last trial?
After. So it was actually in August so after the first trial ended in early July. And I really didn't want to, I expected it would be a hung jury based on the way the trial went, but I really wanted it to be over. I didn't want to hear the name Karen Read again. And I was burnt out. And in August, I started gearing up, saying, all right, this is a war. We got to get the truth out to the public. And I started working on a video series. And then I had talked to a lawyer that was a friend, Kevin Mahoney, that was coming on the channel. And he had talked about doing a book with me. But he wanted to take lead on it. And too much of this story was personal to me. And I knew the evidence much better than Kevin. So I decided, I'm just going to write my own book, and just started working as hard as I could on it. The purpose was to try to throw in my tiny little finger on the other side. Maybe put my finger to plug the dam would be another way to put it. Because all the media is overwhelmingly pro Karen Read, and I try to balance it off with some evidence, discussion of evidence, and not trying to write a partial book. And I don't cross into areas that I don't know, such as intent. I don't cross into that because I don't think it's proved in any way what Karen knew, whether she had any intent. The only thing that is proven with the evidence is that her Lexus struck John O'Keefe. Everything else is kind of still up in the air. But even that is not proven in a court of law. So until a jury decides it, and unfortunately the book came out April 1st, so can't even really be accused of trying to influence the jury pool. Of course, the other side has done nothing but that anyways. But it's also a personal journey for me, Daniel. I think you've probably gone through this. I'm sure you have, where you're trying to cover a case and at the same time, you're trying to build your channel and get clicks and views. And if you cover with every case, that if you cover it from a certain angle, that's where the public enthusiasm is. And that's where you're going to get clicks and views. But is your dedication to the truth, does that supersede clicks and views? Mine did. I can tell you're the same way. And so I took a lot of heat, lost a lot once I flipped on the Karen Read crowd. But I will always pursue the truth. Doesn't mean I'm right about everything. It just means I'm always going to tell you what I think the truth is.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat. I recently, so I'm sure you've heard the term pro burgers, right?
Yeah.
I actually I coined the term pro burgers, and I had been wanting to I don't know who it was in the comment section. Somebody said that I copied it from somebody or whatever the case may have been, but I've been looking for it. And so today I put my mind to find it. And so what I did was I had to figure out when it was that I said it. So I started searching through my, my emails for the term Proburger, and then I searched it also through my messages on Facebook. And lo and behold, I found a message with the term Proburger back in November of 2023. And so I was like, all right, well, this is the first time that I see it, so it's got to be around this time. So November 19th, I found it in about 20 minutes in this members only, which I've now put out there. I have I've made it. It was a members only. It only had 240 some odd views. And I believe I created a video out of it and made a video out of it at the same time. And that's why the term came out there the way it did. But I put it out there and I was watching it. I hadn't seen it. And back then, this is about a year into when the murders had occurred. This is November 2023 now. And a lot of people were still on the fence on whether or not he did it or not. And at this time, if I remember correctly, the DNA in that case was what I think the biggest question mark was. Howard Bloom, the author I mentioned earlier, he had written in an airmail article that the amount of DNA that they found on the knife sheath was very small and that the Idaho State Lab didn't find it. Well, he was a little bit inaccurate. The Idaho State Lab did find the DNA. What wasn't found was a matching CODIS, not necessarily that the DNA was too small. So he was a little bit off on that aspect of it. And we found out that around November of 2023, that's when the first time they mentioned the 8 octillion to 1 chances that DNA belongs to somebody other than Brian Cobberger. And what do you call it? So at that point, that's what made up my mind. Now, I had felt prior to that he was most likely committed the crime. The fact that he turned off his phone during the specific hours that the crime had occurred and he was, has the same vehicle as seen in the camera outside of the area, to me was a pretty obvious solution. But, when it came down to like proving whether or not he committed this crime or not, to me it came down to the DNA. And if it was as small as the amount that Howard Bloom was mentioning, I thought that there was going to be a concern there. But when you get a match as strong as you get, that tells me that, well, there's more than enough. And so that's when I started saying, all right, I'm now 65% sure that this guy committed this crime to about 95% sure. And in that video, I started talking to folks because this is around the time we had just hit we had been at 39,000 subscribers for almost 3 months at that point. And we hadn't moved. And a lot of folks were accusing us of becoming guilters. And that's what they call us, guilters. It's so.
What's the opposite word for people that always believe someone's innocent? Is there an opposite to guilters?
I mean, I just call them pro-burgers, but I mean, if there's something else outside of that case,
that applies generally, to other cases. So
delusional,
where someone, someone that always thinks that they're innocent.
I mean, conspiracy theorists, but to a certain extent, I feel like I'm a conspiracy theorist. I don't believe anything the government tells me. I have a problem with aliens and UFOs and all these other things, right? But I digress. So at this time, we were getting accused of being paid or trying to get views and clicks based on the fact that we were now saying, we're pretty sure that this guy did it. And that's completely the opposite. We just surpassed 42,000 subscribers. And this was in 2023, and so we've gotten, and I want to say in the last month, we just hit another 2,900 subscribers. So in the last month, from the month of March till now, we had almost 3,000 subscribers. And so that tells you that between November 2023 and basically until March of this year, we had no growth, and a lot of that is because we were sticking with the truth. We were sticking with what we know to be true. And it's not, and I go in that video and I tell people, it's really easy to trick people and make people think one way. I can go into any court hearing and take a snippet of something and just stop it, and without explaining what the opposition says, and really blow it up into something.
It really is.
Not what I'm doing here.
And that's what defense teams do. kind of by definition, because their whole job is to create doubt. So they're going to take every little thing and try to. It's usually going to be a and thank you for showing that. It's
Yes,
usually
sir.
going to be a mundane thing that all you need to do is wait for the explanation. But if you're really eager for there to be a conspiracy and you're just kind of this is just entertainment for you, you might not wait for the explanation, and that's what goes on with this. I wanted to ask you though, Daniel. So we kind of have a certain profile here of what we're seeing for the Free Karen Reed crowd.
Yeah.
Is there a profile that you're seeing with the Proburgers?
Well, I'll say this. Yes, there is. There is, but I will say that there is probably all right. So out of the Proburgers, I think they all believe Karen Reed is innocent. But there are a few of the following that believe that that Coburger is guilty, who also believe that Karen Reed is innocent. And so I do see a broader sense of individuals in the Karen Reed case as far as those that think she's innocent. In fact, I saw a podcast today with a former Canton sergeant. I don't know if you've seen this. Former Canton police sergeant come out there talking about how he thinks it's a cover up and a bunch of
Is
other
it Peter
things.
Murphy?
I believe so.
He's crazy. He's nuts. There's
Well,
no other way to decide. But I'm I don't want to be mean to a retired older guy, but he's been a source of a lot of the conspiracy theory problems in this. He was a major source for Shaun of the Gulf. There were a lot of things that were put out there, and some of it was put out. A big false story was put out using my channel, using me personally. And I've been trying to make up for that ever since then. But, they put out this idea that Karen had filmed Colin Albert dealing drugs on the street corner. Now, Colin Albert is the 17-year-old high school kid that the defense is trying to portray as one of the main third-party culprit suspects here, the real killer of John.
right.
And as it turned out, and that same source did give me this, it also told me that there was an active, and given to me at the same time they gave me this, that there was an active DEA investigation into drug dealing in the Canton Police Department. Now, both of these stories were false. Both of them were based on a kernel of truth. So 12 years before John's death, there was a police officer that had a drug addiction problem. He no longer works for the Canton Police. So there was some kind of investigation into him. In addition, Karen Reed did film a drug dealer. And that is in discovery material because she gave that to John, and John sent it via text to Kevin Albert, who he was friends with. And so that's why it's in discovery. But the defense could have used that. They didn't. If it actually showed Colin dealing drugs, they would have used it. But it wasn't. The kid who was the guy who was actually dealing drugs was a 27-year-old man who has since been arrested and sentenced and whatever. Nothing to do with Colin Albert. But they used my channel on that. I put that story out thinking it was verified and true. And I have really spent much of the last year and a half trying to make up for that.
Yeah.
I didn't use Colin's name. I said the nephew, but still unforgivable. People can figure it out. And, I got used, and those people were behind that were connected closely to Karen. So,
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I've been in a similar situation with a lady named Kim. There was somebody that came out named WSU Mom Kim. And I got nothing negative to say against her. I don't think she ever did anything too, how can I put it? Well, so she contacted the show, right? She's from the area. Her daughter attends WSU. This is all true. And she told me about this story about the weekend that Brian Cobberger's alleged murders, or the murders happened that Brian Cobberger allegedly committed. It was parents' weekend, and so she and her husband were there, and they had, I guess, the next day left, and this was November 13th. And on their way out, around 5 p.m., they end up getting an alert saying to shelter in place since they were in the area, and their daughter and son attended WSU at the time. And so she contacted her daughter, and daughter said, "Oh, we already know about that. That happened earlier, yada, yada, yada." And they ended it there. And then, well, this turns into something big, and WSU mom Kim begins to watch this over the interwebs, and begins to realize that there's a rumor that goes around that people knew earlier than the 911 call, that there were students who had known, University of Idaho students that had known. So she contacted her daughter. Her daughter ended up being a cheerleader. No, not a cheerleader. I'm sorry. Her daughter ended up being a sorority sister at WSU. So she was one of the sorority members. And she had connections to one of her best friends who was dating one of the football players for the University of Idaho. And what ended up happening was, so she called her daughter and asked what happened. When did you know? When did you know? What's going on? Now, this is a week after the murders. So this isn't the same day. And the daughter's like, I don't know, sometime in the morning. And when she's like, well, the 911 call came in at 11:58, so it couldn't have been in the morning. If you knew in the morning, then you must have been one of the kids who was told something beforehand.
Right.
And when she continued to ask her, well, like, what time? And her daughter was like, I don't know. And over the course of a couple of days, her daughter said something to the effect like, I don't know, 10:30. And so her daughter wasn't really sure, so it's a Sunday morning. It was the parents' weekend there, but there was parties galore in that area. And so a lot of people weren't waking up until around 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock. So I strongly suspect that her morning probably was closer to 1. Now, she went off the handle with a bunch of different rumors, right? She started going off that there was some injuries and some things about the crime scene that made no sense. Now, I verified who she was and that her daughter did attend the school there. But I could not verify any of her story because obviously I'm not a detective investigating the case. But I interviewed her and I kept to what it is that she knew, what it is that she talked about with her daughter, and when her daughter knew. The rest of the stuff didn't come from anybody close to the case itself. It was all just rumors from the area. And the best example I can give is that, a couple miles down the street from my house, somebody got shot not too long, stabbed. I'm actually going to start covering this case. It's an unsolved case. Lady got stabbed, they found her in a bush. I live a couple miles down the road, but I don't know anything about it. Same thing her. She was there, but just because she's there doesn't mean she knows anything more than what her daughter could have told her. And in the end, I just felt like maybe perhaps there was an inaccuracy there with the timing, and the rest of it, she went on other channels and would tell all these other different channels, like, yeah, we, these were the injuries. This was that, and this was this. And I'm just like, where are you even getting that from? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they ran with it, and then it kind of reflected bad on me because we put her on the show first.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? So I
this
totally
is a huge problem in these cases. So look, this is, again, I'm not someone I'm not in law enforcement. I'm not someone that loves true crime and has extensive experience researching cases. One of the early cases when I do research a case, I like to really get into every detail of it. And so one of the ones that I did on that was Lizzie Borden. And another one that I did was the man on the train, or the killer from the train, or something like this. Was about a series of axe murders where this killer was allegedly, it's been put together by historian, statistician Bill James, but it's a good book. And he's suspected, I guess now they've put this together, this axe murderer, I don't know, something like 40 more killings. And he was, at the time, this is around 1910, 1912, he's arriving in these little towns, getting off a train, killing a family, and then getting back on the train and leaving. So it was very difficult for them to track. And a lot of people would get convicted of the crime and falsely convicted and sent to jail. But when you read the details of it, and the same thing with the Lizzie Borden case, it struck me, and some of the other cases that I looked at, how these witnesses come out of the woodwork. Now, it might be something that somebody that misremembers something. It might be something that just wants to insert themselves into the narrative. Because we see in any famous case, and if it's a murder that's in a little town in 1912, in that little town, it's a very famous case. It's the biggest thing to happen in that town and since its existence. And not everybody, so 80-90% of the public won't want to get involved at all. But there's that percentage that just, this somehow makes their lives more meaningful to be able to say they were a witness. And so they feel that pull to insert themselves into the case. And so their testimony becomes completely unreliable. And this is why, as you know, as former law enforcement, that the police don't, when they have a homicide, don't release a lot of the details to the public, because in every big high profile case, there's a certain amount of false confessions. People that come forward, happen in the Lizzie Borden case, and say, I did it, I killed him. But so police have learned from experience that you have to hold back certain details. And that way, when someone comes forward, that's a way of dismissing that as just someone that's crazy. But I just a long time ago decided that I really have to be very suspicious about most eyewitness testimony if it's not backed by other eyewitnesses or by evidence. Now, there are some exceptions to that. So in the Karen Reed case, well, this is backed by other evidence. So Karen called Kerry Roberts, who's a friend of the O'Keefe family, very close friend of their family, at 5 a.m. and says, John's dead, Kerry, and then hangs up. Kerry, rubbing sleep for her eyes, is like, what is that? Then Karen calls right back and says, I don't know, something's happened to John. I think he's been hit by a plow. Now, I would believe this testimony even if there was no verification of it, because Kerry has no incentive. She doesn't, at the time, know the McCabe's, doesn't know the Alberts. She's not part of any plausible conspiracy. She's not only a close friend of John, she's a close friend of his parents. She's the one that brought the parents to the hospital that day. She has no reason to make up and invent such a specific memory like that. So to me, that's a reliable piece of memory. But in addition to that, it turns so, and this was introduced in court. After that phone call ended, Kerry called the local police to see if somebody had showed up, if they had found somebody hurt, somebody struck by a plow, and then she called the hospital. And that evidence, including the calls, were introduced to court. So, I mean, that verifies, that really corroborates her story, that's what Karen said to her. So to me, that becomes that piece of eyewitness testimony becomes a key piece of evidence, because Karen had no reason for thinking that at that time, unless in her mind she was putting together something that happened. But in general, I'm very suspicious of eyewitness evidence that isn't confirmed in any other way. And people have a thing that are against circumstantial evidence, but most cases are built on circumstantial evidence, and circumstantial evidence of a nature that can't be manufactured is very compelling, especially once you put it all together.
Yeah, I mean, circumstantial evidence weighs the same as any other evidence that there is. I think that is just like you mentioned, a defense attorney's statement. Circumstantial evidence is blah 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 blah. And so, no, I agree with you there. There's a lot of things in Karen Reed's statements that are concerning. There's that. There's the the statements that she has made. How often they're changing. From looking down before he approached to the door to seeing him walk through the door. And then even talking about potentially even hitting him and incapacitating him somehow by hitting him on the foot. I don't understand how running over somebody's toe is going to knock them out. I mean, she seems like a fairly intelligent person. I mean, her profession would establish that. I mean, she's got the degrees. I'm not necessarily, I know they weren't in medicine, but, I think most people can determine that you're not going to get knocked out by getting your foot run over, or getting hit in the knee. Those type of things. And so, some of her story don't make sense. She claims that, she went out to go look for him, and she went to all these other places except the last place that she saw him, supposedly. Yet she's able to see him through a blizzard. Those are concerning. That to me tells me that, just logically thinking out loud, if she wanted to go back and see where he was at, follow her footsteps like she said she would, the last place, the first place she would go would be the last place. And if she did that, she may have seen what she had seen and then taken off and driven around and then gone and picked up her two friends there, and then acting, oblivious to what really occurred until she goes back out there and finds him again through the blizzard. For me, I think it's more about the evidence, but, going back real quick with this sergeant who, from Canton, I know somebody had asked about it earlier, about this Canton sergeant, retired, he made some statements like that. Well, first and foremost, he said that if there's a dead body on somebody's lawn, and that person is Brian Albert, who has his history and his career, one could assume that he's being attacked by somebody that he's arrested or whatever the case may have been. How did the call come in? Was the call that there was a dead body, or was the call that there was an unresponsive person? What was the initial call for?
Not a dead body. It was definitely, I don't know if they specifically said unresponsive, but yeah, this was a call to try to save John. And they, in fact, when Michael Proctor first was getting the detail, was on call, and when he gets the initial call about this case, I think about 10:07 in the morning. At that point, John had been transported to the hospital maybe a half hour earlier, and he called the senior firefighter that was responding at the scene, and he said, so to get an overview, and the firefighter said, I think he's got about a 10% chance of living. So, and that probably was not exactly accurate. I don't know if there really was. I don't think there was that much of a chance. But the point is they were treating this as a rescue. This was not, they were doing everything they could to try to save John O'Keefe. And sometimes people, the human body, when you are rapidly freezed, can be revived. People that fall through the ice and
Right.
at the bottom of a pond for a half hour and things like that. So I
On the
wanted to
on
ask
the
you.
911 well, real quick, on the 911 call, did the callers appear to be in danger?
No.
Okay, so then, some of the things that he is referencing is an active crime scene, an active shooter, an active situation that's going on, is what
Right.
he is describing in that interview today. As somebody in ex-law enforcement, I can tell you the way you're describing the scene, the way it came through the call, I know for a fact that that's the way it also came through. I just wanted to make sure our viewers understood that as
Yeah.
well. But I would
Right.
not have taken that as an active situation. And
Right.
you also have to have some sort of evidence to enter into somebody's house. You can always
Right.
ask, yes. I mean, there's nothing saying that you can't ask. However,
Mhm.
when you're trained in the academy, or at least the way I was in the academy, and I'll use DWI as an example. If I pull
Yeah.
somebody over for running a stop sign, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're drunk. They just ran a stop sign.
Right.
Now, for DWI, they want us to get 3 different offenses and record those if that's the nature of the stop. But let's just say that wasn't. I saw him run a stop sign and I wanted to pull him over. Well, I pull him over. If I don't have any indication of alcohol, I can't pull him out and do a standardized field sobriety test. Now, I could ask him, yes, that very much I could, but let's just say I don't smell anything and I actually document that. I didn't
Right.
smell anything. There was no slurred speech or anything, but I still asked him anyways. I'm gonna
Yeah.
get eaten up by a lawyer. I'm gonna get
Yeah.
eaten up by a lawyer, even if he gave me permission. And that's the first thing they teach you in the academy. You
Yeah.
have to have a reason. Even if
Right.
you're asking, you still have to have a reason and articulate that in your synopsis as to why you were doing it.
Right.
And what would have been the reason? I understand that there's a dead body out on the lawn. However, the lead detective didn't arrive until what time did you say?
Well, yeah, the lead detective never arrived that day. But so
Mm,
the way it works in Massachusetts is any unattended death is ultimately, the investigation will be run by the state police in conjunction with local police. And
mhm,
so it'll be state police detectives that are assigned to that county's district attorney's office. So there were 4 detectives assigned to the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. And Michael Proctor and Yuri Buchanan were the ones that were on call that night. So they were the
mhm.
ones that were called to respond. Um, but the initial people on the scene were the local police, the Canton police.
Yeah.
And so the Sergeant Lank did actually go in the house
Hmm.
and was inside the house when the owners, Brian Albert and his wife, came down the stairs. And so we can't just dismiss his observations and his instincts. And he testified that when they came down the house, they come down those stairs, they looked like they had just woken up, in particular Brian, who had had a really long day the day before, started out in New York at a police officer's funeral, drove back, was out drinking all night. They're up till 2:30 or something like that. And now it's 4 hours later. So his instincts were, so no, he arrives there We don't know if he walked into an open door, but more than likely Jen McCabe let him in. So Brian Albert is married. His wife, Nicole's sister is Jen McCabe, pretty famously associated with this case. Jen is the one that went into the house and, well, first she had tried to call her sister and her brother-in-law a few times from the street, and they didn't wake up. So she goes up to the house. The door is open, so she goes in. She goes up to the second floor bedroom, goes into the bedroom, and wakes up her sister and her brother-in-law. Then she probably goes back down the stairs, and as that happens, Sergeant Lank is at the door. So I don't remember if it was in his testimony, if he just walked in, but she probably opened the door and let him in. So he's in the house when now the owners come down the stairs, wiping sleep from their eyes. So what he saw probably told him, all right, this door's nobody's trying to keep me out, right? Here I am, a cop. Nobody's trying to keep me out. I'm able to walk right in. And I see the homeowners clearly confused and coming down after, having just woken up. So right away, that would have been enough for him to say, yeah, this doesn't look like anything involved, like this guy came in the house and something happened here last night. Now, and in addition, like you said, he would have had to have permission from the homeowners to search the house. But at that time, everybody was saying he wasn't in the house. So Jen McCabe's husband arrived, and he had been at the house too, and they were all saying no. He was supposed to come to the house, but he never came in. So they really had no probable cause at that point or no basis for being suspicious, especially combined with what Sergeant Lank had seen and his instinct. You can't as a cop, right? You can't just dismiss a police officer's first instincts or intuition based on the evidence that he sees.
Right.
That's part of it.
You got to follow the evidence. And in this case, I think it would have been very difficult to ever have gone into the house, to be honest with you, because yes, John O'Keefe's body was found in the property, but that doesn't give you enough to go into the property and check. Like, we can look at the Richard Allen case, for instance. Bodies were found on Ron Logan's property, but it wasn't until they found out that he had lied about his alibi that they were able to pull up a warrant to actually search his property. So just because the bodies were found on his property did not give law enforcement the opportunity to search his property. And the same thing would have been done here as well. Just because his body was found there, he wasn't, unless there was like a blood trail or something like that, there's nothing there that would indicate that he came from inside of that property. If an officer would have tried to have approached me and asked for a warrant, I would have told him to go get more evidence other than that. And the first piece of evidence that you can go out there and get is, what you have is the deceased, you have his deceased phone, you go and you get a warrant for his phone, pen trace, and then you figure out if he made entry into that building. If he did, then you start following that evidence. If he did not go into that building and you have other evidence, you have to follow it, and that other evidence being a broken taillight on Karen Reed's SUV. And it's also on camera at 5:23 a.m. that it's broken. Now, I know a lot of those that believe that she's innocent is going to point out to the impact that she had when she backed out of the garage. However, there are no pieces of taillight on the floor. And I think that I have heard a lot of people try to explain it to me saying that, oh, it's because those pieces fell into the light and they fell somewhere else, which makes zero sense. That light combusted, it blew, it popped. You would have seen the pieces on the ground. And so
it would have broken the fresh layer of snow.
Exactly. You would have, and it's bright red on the ground, on the white snow. So you would have been able to see those pieces. And as it leaves, you can see clear as day that it's missing a significant piece of that tail light on the right side. And that's at 5:23 a.m. before John O'Keefe's body is found. And so to me, you also have the micro pieces of tail light. You start following that evidence. Now, I know there's some folks that say, hey, well, like this sergeant, you should have called the bus. You should have called all these people. Did he not realize there was a active blizzard going on and they had some problems maintaining the scene? You would think he's from the area.
And he's the same guy that is saying that they should have taken pictures of John's body in the snow. For God's sakes, they're trying to save the man's life. You think they're suddenly going to delay that to let the police come in here and start documenting the crime scene? It just stuns me that anybody would say that, but especially former police officers. I just, we're dealing with a level of insanity here. And also, in terms of the Canton police investigation. Let's just entertain for the moment the hypothesis that there's a cover-up going on. And this cover-up extends to the Mass State Police, but also to the Canton Police, because the homeowner, Brian Albert, his brother is a detective on the Canton Police Force. And later on, the police chief, 10 days later, driving by, finds a piece of taillight on the ground. So that's part of the essential theory. And that's why, and this is why people are saying, well, if Canton Police was serious about this investigation, they would have searched the house. Well, let me ask people this. Why did the Canton Police, and they're made fun of for this, go out and collect blood in those party cups? Why did they take a leaf blower and document melting that snow so they could, while recording it with a camera, so they could document exactly where the blood was? So by looking at that, you could see not only where the blood location where the drops were, but by melting the snow around it, you got a sense of the time that drops may have fallen. Now, if you are police officers that are in look the other way mode, which you would be if the word has come down, if you're in a corrupt police department and the word has come down, hey, this involves our guys, look the other way. We don't want anything. We don't want you searching that house. Look the other way. Well, if you give these guys the order to look the other way, they are not going to be they're not going to be doing anything beyond what they have to do. And they certainly don't have to be collecting that blood or using the leaf blower. That's being done because they're highly, highly motivated cops who are afraid that evidence is going to perish, and it would have perished because the state police aren't coming until hours later. So the image of look cops that are in cover-up mode or look the other way mode is completely opposed by the idea that these guys are out there going beyond the call of duty to try to preserve that evidence.
Yeah. I live in Texas, but I've been to a lot of snowy places. You mentioned the leaf blower. I watched that video here recently, and the snow is flying off of it. Now, I'm not from Massachusetts. I'm not sure how, the snow falls out there. But to me, I'm not sure if a human being can replicate the snowfall so that way it blows off that manner. For instance, I've been to places like Minnesota. I've been to places like Colorado, Montana, et cetera, and Pittsburgh, all up and down there. And if I were to put snow on top of something, it because of my hands and because of my warmth and a bunch of other things and just kind of moving things, the snow tends to stick together. And so for it to be flown off the way it was with the air leads me to believe that it was placed there naturally, not the snow that is, not that somebody poured a bunch of snow on top of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think if those police had not taken that action to preserve that snow, that blood, it would have been lost. So where did that blood come from? I believe what happened was, and because if you look at the blood, it's not. So at the time John was struck, there's at the most a dusting of snow there. He's found on grass, basically. The snow didn't accumulate where he was lying. So where those blood drops were suggests that the blood fell on that snow after the state alleges John was struck. Is that an aha moment? No, because Karen herself her hands were covered in blood, John's blood. She had blood in her hair. She testifies on her face. John had a laceration on his tongue. That's examined in the autopsy, probably from when his head hit the ground, he bit his tongue. And that produced a significant amount of blood in his mouth that stayed in his mouth and in his nose. Where it's in the mouth, it's with saliva, possibly vomit. So it's not coagulating. And when Karen tries to do mouth to mouth, that's when she gets this blood on her hands and on her face. And so presumably that blood that is found in the snow probably dripped off Karen. Or it could have dripped off when the first responders moved John. But he had some blood that had gathered in his mouth and around him. So but the Canton police didn't know any of that. They just knew that this guy was found dead or dying on the lawn, and that there was blood at the scene and a broken cocktail glass. So they were doing their best to preserve what evidence they could, knowing that the state police would arrive at some point to take over the investigation. So they were never, ever going to take a shovel to that crime scene and start shoveling the plow bank. And that's why they didn't find the taillight pieces. That's a big point for the FKR people. They're like, how come the Canton police didn't find those bright red taillight pieces, but the state police found it in the dark? Because they didn't look. Those pieces were buried inside the plow bank. There's no way the Canton police were ever going to take a shovel to a state police crime scene. They were just preserving the stuff that if they didn't preserve it, it would have been gone. They were doing no more than that. So to me, that explains, that's a big part of the mystery here, that people, but they don't want the answers. They don't want the solutions like that.
I know.
It's juicy to believe in it,
I hear you. In the Brian Cobberger case right now, the biggest, I guess, conspiracy or the biggest thing is the 7 minutes that Brian Cobberger's defense team is claiming can prove that Brian Cobberger didn't commit the crime. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this.
No.
All right. So the defense has acquired a guy named Cyray. Cyray works with triangulation and pings and all these other things with phone locations. And he's assisted a lot of prosecutors. This is the first time that he's assisted a defense team. All right. Now, I think that there's a reason why he's now switching sides. I think that he's probably assisted his last prosecutor before this. That's my theory. That's what I think. Well, anyways, he has two arguments. He is claiming that the state is withholding information that can prove Brian Cobberger or partially corroborate his alibi. And that the other thing is that he can partially corroborate Brian Cobberger's alibi. So back in when Brian Cobberger was arrested, he became a suspect December 19th and was arrested December 29th. So that's a 10-day window between the time that they learned his name to the time that they handcuffed him. And so what does that tell you? A lot of the investigation came after the fact. Well, anyways, during that time, they did the workup on his phone they did some warrants and they pulled the workup for his phone on December 23rd. And they were able to determine that his phone stopped reporting to the network at 2:47 a.m.
Okay.
And what Brian Cobberger's defense expert is claiming is that his phone did not stop reporting to the network, that it continued to report to the network for an additional 7 minutes. Now, that is at 2:54 a.m. Now, the murders happened at 4:08 a.m., so well over an hour before. Now, the reason why this is important is because in the probable cause affidavit, the state has alluded that Brian Cobberger was traveling in a direction towards a street that would take you directly to Moscow. And the defense then comes up and says that the state is going to present that there's a camera on that street closer towards Moscow that picks up a vehicle, white sedan, that the state is going to say is Brian Cobberger at 3:02 a.m. But he didn't turn off his phone at 2:47. He turned off his phone at 2:54. Now, the defense goes into this story saying, well, you can travel quite a bit of a distance, and that what Cyray is going to say is that the direction he was traveling in that 7 minutes when his phone turned off was not towards Moscow. It was towards a different direction, probably south. The problem is that when you look at the map, there's another street that takes you to 270. And it's literally only 4 miles out of the way. And I think it's a total of maybe 6.5 minutes round trip to get in front of Floyd Cannabis Shop on a highway. And they're saying that at 2:54, when his phone turned off, that it's not him because he's facing one way. And 7 minutes later, when his car's passing by, I'd have to pull up the maps to show you, but there's another street that intersects and the direction that he was traveling. And the second thing is that if you go back to the PCA, there was some corroborating evidence other than just the phone evidence. There was cameras in that area. And so they had him until 2:53. And so in reality, there's only 1 minute in question as far as where Brian Cobberger went. And in that 1 minute, there's a street It's called Sunrise. That takes you back to 270. And so that's the first claim. I think it's complete bullcrap. The second claim is the one with the advanced timing records. So what Cyray is stating is that AT&T began giving out to law enforcement advanced timing records for people's cell phones in June of 2023, but that he had prior knowledge that they did it beforehand. He goes in to say that back in August of 2021, an FBI agent gave him some advanced timing records from AT&T and then took them back from him and said, hey, you weren't supposed to see that sort of thing. Well, anyway, so he goes on to say, well, I know they exist. And he says that they existed then, but they were expensive, and that the only law enforcement agency that had access to them was the FBI, and that the FBI worked on this case, and that the FBI had the advanced timing records for 2 of the phones of the deceased and for 38 cell phones from a tower dump that they had done early on in the investigation, and of a suspect or of a person of interest that they had early on in the investigation. Well, the state responded saying, you're right. The AT&T advance records weren't held or weren't given to law enforcement until June of 2023. But prior to that, they were given, and they were given to the state, and the state provided it to the defense. What they didn't provide to the defense was Brian Cobberger's AT&T timing records. Now, the reason why they didn't provide Brian Cobberger's AT&T timing records is because Brian Cobberger's phone was turned off during the commission of the crime. So when they did that tower dump and pulled that 3,800 phones, his phone wasn't in there. And there's an affidavit from AT&T indicating that there's prior to June 2023, or actually prior to May 2023, that AT&T only held on to the advanced timing records for 7 days. And so when you look at Cyray's affidavit, he's talking about 2 of the deceased victims, a male subject that was early on a person of interest, and 3,800 people from a tower dump. All of those were taken within 7 days. Brian Cobberger wasn't a suspect until December 19th. And so well outside of the 7 days, but Cyray still believes that they should have it. And he's put out this big old fuss saying that this is, he's never seen this before, how a state can withhold timing records or evidence like this. They're purposefully trying to hinder him. And I don't think he read the documents, to be honest with you.
What's the FBI role in the Cobberger investigation? From when did they get involved? Have they been indispensable? Has it been a good? Because it seemed to me, and you know this much more now, but it seemed to me that the state was primarily running that investigation, along with the Moscow police. So, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, well, the FBI found him. The FBI caught him. The FBI handed him on a silver platter. This was the FBI. So basically what had occurred was Brian Cobberger, he committed this crime, left the knife sheath behind, allegedly, all that. And they found his DNA. And what the state was able to do is they took that DNA, that STR profile they created, and they took it to a lab in Houston, or in the Woodlands outside of Houston, called Courtroom. And there they try to develop an IgG genetic tree. And they couldn't, they came up with like 4 dudes that they wanted more information from, more DNA information. And they were at a standstill. And so the FBI said, hey, we'll take over, we'll get this done, and we have more accessories. And long story short, they ended up having a backdoor option to a couple of places that, quote unquote, shouldn't have allowed law enforcement to go in there and look, but in their bylaws and in their rules, there's a little loop around that says that unless there's a law enforcement investigation, then law enforcement can look into it. Go figure. I mean, that's the only reason they would look into it, but I digress. So they looked into these 2 other, I think one was GEDmatch and one was like Heritage. And they ended up coming up with a relative that was able to pinpoint to Brian Cobberger. And so on December 19th, they decided to say, hey, this is who he is. This is his name. Moscow Police Department, go develop your PC and find him. Now, the FBI also identified the vehicle, the white vehicle that was driving around, and they also did all the work on his cell phone that also determined that he had been within 100 meters of the house 23 separate occasions between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. Between June of 2022 and November 7th, 2022, a week before the murders. I wonder how many times he was there that week between November 7th and November 13th. They don't put that in the documents, but up to that point, it was 23. So, they basically said, hey, this is your guy. It's a tip because the IgG is not admissible in court. It's kind of similar to a lie detector test. And the reason why is because the IgG folks don't go and get Brian Cobberger's DNA and test it to the DNA on the knife sheath. That's for the Idaho State Lab to do that once they got their warrants. And so this is just a most likely, more than likely. Now, how do you determine if the IgG was done correctly? Well, if the person that they pointed out ends up being a match, if they say it's Brian Cobberger, you go out there and you get Brian Cobberger and you test his DNA and it comes back a match, that means they did it right. If they say it's Brian Cobberger and it comes back, it's his third cousin, then that means they did it wrong. So kind of just, you know what I mean? Yeah. So FBI did everything on this case, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Which
good. That's good to hear.
Which I think they might do some more if this doesn't go in line. Like, let's just say there's an acquittal or a hung jury. Right now, there's the statute for law in Idaho for stalking is that the victim would have to be annoyed, harassed, or in fear, meaning they would have had to have known that the person was stalking them. So if Brian Cobberger was surveilling them secretly, that wouldn't be considered stalking. Now, I don't know if that's the same thing for the federal rules. And given the fact that he was living in Washington and traveling to Idaho, tells me that I think that if this ends up going in a way that's not favorable for the state, then I think federal charges are probably going to come right after.
All right. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, so I just want to ask before I forget, because this is something that's always fascinated me. So in the same courtroom as Karen Reed, there's another trial underway now where a doctor killed his wife. And I don't actually follow this case closely, so I don't know the details, but he took her body and dumped it in a pond right next to his house, weighing it down by putting rocks in the pockets. And I've always been fascinated by these doctors who kill their wife or their girlfriend thing, because from my experience looking at these cases, there are no criminal geniuses. There are no criminal masterminds. That's left for the world of TV. Every case that I've seen, and the killer may be an intelligent person, and often is, like, say, even like a Ted Bundy or somebody like that. But when it comes to the crime themselves, they tend to be more or less sloppy. There's a lot of mistakes involved. And even Brian Cobberger here, who was preparing for this, maybe for all his life, but certainly for years in his interest in law enforcement and studying this at the graduate level, thinking about his crimes and how he's going to get away with it and stuff like that. And he still made big mistakes. So do you think, do you know of any cases where there actually was a criminal genius when it came to covering things up? Any examples of that?
If there are, they're not caught.
Someone just mentioned in chat the Zodiac killer, so maybe that's a good example.
Maybe the Zodiac. He never got caught. But he put his name out there. I think they figured out who he was, and there was a key in one of his puzzles or whatever. And apparently, it wasn't that difficult to figure out. Once they figured it out, a lot of people were like, "Oh man, this was right in front of you." And I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. I think it was like somebody's name or something like that. And once he put in that key with what he was saying, he told people who he was. I think a lot of these folks, if they're putting out messages or they're trying to alert the police that they're all connected somehow, they are wanting to get caught in some way.
Yeah, like the BTK or
Exactly. And so if there are these criminal masterminds and whatnot, then there could be. We wouldn't know about them,
Well, and people have mentioned that in chat too, that what about the unsolved cases? And that's a kind of good point. But I do also think that just because a case is unsolved doesn't mean that it involves a criminal mastermind. Because I think whenever occasionally these cases are solved, sometimes many years later, and when they go back and look at it, I can't think of any examples where the criminal knowingly really just did truly ingenious kind of things, Um,
They get sloppy. People get sloppy in anything, whether it's work or whatever. You do it long enough, people start to get complacent, things like that.
yeah.
The Rex Humerman, the Long Island guy,
Yeah.
architect, intelligent dude.
Definitely intelligent guy. Definitely. Yep.
And he got away with it for a long, long time. And then now you're starting to see a lot of the mistakes he made. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that I think there was some corruption going on in that law enforcement department as well, with the chief being or somebody very high up. Wasn't there somebody very high up in that department around that time who was also
who was friends with him or something? And I think the other thing too is that when it comes to serial killers, they are extremely hard to catch because they have no motive. And so when you have someone is killed, the police begin by looking for means and motive. But these guys, there is no motive. Their motive is they enjoy killing. And so it becomes really impossible for or not impossible, very difficult for investigators to track that down afterwards, because they're going to start out by going around saying who had a motive to kill this person.
Yeah.
But a serial killer won't answer that. Doesn't provide an answer to that question. So I think a lot of serial killers get away with it, not because they're doing ingenious work and covering things. It's just too difficult for the police to find anything like that.
It can be. I mean, it definitely can be. I mean, especially if you have, I'm just going to create a profile. Like if you have this guy who's super smart about this, wants to commit a crime and get away with it and commit multiple crimes, he's probably going to find himself a career that's going to be putting him in a bunch of different places, maybe like a truck driver. And if you're in a truck driver place and that's the only thing, right? That's what you get off on, and you have the discipline to not leave your bodily fluids behind. I think that you could probably find some super genius there, because it's a lot easier to kind of get away with something like that, traveling from one place to another. A lot of these departments don't talk to each other. So if there is some sort of, I don't know, MO, there's something that they do, whether it's something that they like, it could be something that's difficult to find by doing it in that manner.
Right.
And you probably choose a profession like that out of for the job or for the hobby. You know what I mean? You don't choose the profession because you need it.
So something that allows you to travel.
Right. Or like some of these nurses,
driver, salesman,
Yeah. Some of these nurses that, like The Good Nurse. Have you seen that movie, The Good Nurse?
I read the book. I didn't see the movie, but yeah.
Yeah. So a situation like that where you can have somebody who just gets off on taking others' life, and it gives them a sense of power or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably going to find them in those professions if they're the super genius type. You know what I mean?
Right. I'm just even the ones that have got away with it and have exercised a little bit of cleverness, I'm just not aware of any case where there's actual super genius level stuff. There's no Hannibal Lecters out there.
Right. And I mean, it doesn't mean that there wasn't mistakes made. It's just like, for instance, if you're a trucker and you've never, gotten in trouble in your entire life and never had your DNA swapped, you may have left your DNA at a couple of places, but if there's nothing to compare it to, I mean, maybe now that the IgG is becoming a new thing, that's probably going to get you caught. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. You getting ready for our NFL draft show yet, Daniel? You start researching your picks?
Yeah, I am. I'm hoping. I got a couple players that I'm hoping the Steelers end up getting. A couple players I hope to stay away from. We end up usually getting the players that I hope we stay away from. A couple years back, if you would have been watching me on draft night, I would have been like, not Kenny Pickett, not Kenny Pickett, not Kenny Pickett. And then the Steelers draft Kenny Pickett, and I'm like, gosh almighty. What about yourself?
Are they going to sign Aaron Rodgers? Is that still up in?
Oh yeah, he's already signed. He's already signed. They just haven't put it out there yet.
All right.
Yeah,
good luck with that.
I know some folks. But
good luck with that, man. I don't think that's gonna work out too well.
Manning for Manning,
Tomlinson,
man. Archie Manning.
I mean, is Tomlinson really going to work out with Aaron Rodgers' ego and his, his lack of commitment to a team, any team that he goes to? I don't know. I just don't. I see a clash there with any good established coach and Aaron Rodgers.
I think this time around it's more because the lack of commitment is on the Steelers' part, which is why this probably taking so long. I think they're only offering him 1 year, and he wants 2, if not 3. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I thought he did play better last year towards the end, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see.
He's got the talent. There's no question about it. The first time the Jets played the Patriots last year, he sliced and diced us apart. And you're looking at and every throw was perfectly on time, perfectly threaded. And you're like, man, this is why Aaron Rodgers is so great. But he can't really sustain that for a season because he's a selfish guy. And their offense, with Green Bay all those years, for most of those years, the offense was inconsistent. And he didn't get along with any of his offensive coordinators or any of his head coaches. He believed, I'm the guy, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Don't tell me what to do. Yeah. And he was the anti-Tom Brady.
Yeah. No, you're right. He's a 4-time NFL MVP. Hopefully he can bring another one and bring the 7th ring to Pittsburgh. That'd be nice.
That'll put you guys on top.
That will again. So what do you think about this jury selection in the Karen Reed case? A lot of people have been actually acknowledging that they're familiar with the case. What are your thoughts on that?
Looks like about 85 to 90% of the prospective jurors say they're familiar with it. And that's not that's not disqualifying. But you're going to take a closer look at them. And then the next question is, have you formed opinions on this case? And quite a few of them do say that. Now, of course, some people just don't want to do jury duty, and that's an easy way to get out. Sure, I'm aware of this case. I know who did it. All right, go home. And so, the worry is that there are going to be people that hide the opinions that they have in order to get on this case. Maybe they want to sell a book in the future. Maybe they want to ingratiate themselves with the Karen Reed crowd, the Turtle Boy crowd. It's just a real, it's the issue is one of integrity. Like, can you stand before a judge and say you have not formed an opinion on this case and basically lie to him? That's a heavy thing to do. But some of these people that follow this have they're posting online that they're willing to do that. Mm-hmm. People are posting online saying, I've been summoned for jury duty. If I get on there, I'm going to make sure Karen is acquitted. So this and that happened in the last trial. So this is where the unethical defense strategy of trying to pollute the jury pool has paid off for them. It's not an acquittal strategy. To get an acquittal, you have to get 12 people in the room to unanimously say this beyond a reasonable doubt. And this strategy is never going to achieve that. It's a mistrial strategy. And the idea is you get 1 or 2 people that just won't be sold, or they come in with their minds made up, or they hate the police so much that they're not going to convict no matter what. And then you try to argue that you're not going to have a third trial, because whatever you do, because of this mass hysteria, there's always going to be 1, 2, or 3 of those FKR people that get onto the jury. And at some point, the prosecution might give up. That might be what I think that's what the strategy is.
Do you think it's too late to try to get different jurors from a different place?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely too late for this trial. I don't know if they do get another mistrial, and I don't know if they're able to poll the jurors. But let's say they are able to find out that it was close to conviction, like 11-1, 12-2. 11-1, 10-2. If that happens, do they try something different next time, where they try to move it to a different jurisdiction, or bus in the jurors, like in the trial of Richard Allen? They bust in the jurors from like an hour away. So I don't know. It's definitely in that area of Dedham, Canton. There's definitely a much higher awareness of the case, but that awareness now is growing with each trial, and it's pretty high all around the state, and maybe even to some degree all around the country now. So,
yeah, it's definitely one of the more popular cases out there. I'm out here in Texas and I'm talking about it. And so, Yeah, you definitely know that it's moved across the state and even around the world.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I thought that once the defense hired a former juror on their for the attorneys, that's probably a sign you might want to get jurors from another place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very just one the bizarre things and unique things that have happened in this case just never seem to stop. Like every week something goes by, sometimes every couple of days, and something really weird happens. You're like, nobody's ever seen that before, you know? So yeah, hiring the defense team hiring a juror from the last trial who happens to be a lawyer. That's really unusual. In this case, too, just another example that doesn't really have much meaning, but it just shows how bizarre this case is. So as Karen is arriving to 34 Fairview with Jen McCabe and Kerry Roberts to look for John, as they're getting in front of the house, it's the snow, it's really coming down. They're really at the height of the blizzard. Winds is howling 35, 45 miles an hour. Karen sends a call to John. And it's while that call is being sent that she spots what she somehow knows is John lying buried in the snow in the yard.
Mhm.
So she throws her phone down on the seat and jumps out of the still moving. She yells, "Stop." But because the driver, Kerry Roberts, doesn't understand, doesn't see John, doesn't quite come to a stop. So when Karen jumps out of the car, she actually hits the ground moving and falls, but then jumps to her feet and runs over to start saving John. Well, when she threw her phone down on the back seat, it was still sending the call to John. So it reaches his voicemail, and the next 5 minutes of what happens is amazingly captured on his voicemail. So you not only
Really?
pick up Jen McCabe calling 911 in that whole call, but you can get a sense of the hysteria of Karen running around screaming because the door's open. You can hear Carrie, Jen. You know, you hear this kind of craziness, just screaming. Does that ever happen before in a case? I mean, what are the odds that she happens to be calling and leaves the phone on and it goes to his voice? I mean, it's just on and on, the strange things in this case that just keep popping up. They never
Does
seem to end.
anybody does she come out saying, "Did I hit him?"
At that point, no, it's no.
On that
There's
voicemail?
nothing really useful picked up on there because they could have had the 911 call from the police dispatch anyways. So there really isn't anything actually useful. It's just one of the other odd things, or even just the fact that Karen backed into John's truck in the driveway.
Mhm.
Now I believe it was just an accident, because she nudged it so lightly that it was not going to do any damage. So a lot of people, when they first heard this and she released this to the public through Court TV, were saying, "Well, she did it on purpose to cover up the damage because she happens to back in the general area of that same of the taillight, the broken taillight."
Yeah.
But I don't think she did it on purpose because she didn't. She did it at such low speed. I don't think she was aware that she even touched the
Mm.
vehicle. So it becomes just another strange, endless series of coincidences and odd occurrences in this case, and it's just the nature of the beast, you know.
Now, this is when she's backing up at 5:23 a.m. That's when she starts to go and backtrace her steps, right? She hadn't left before then, correct?
Right. So she's pulling out, as far as we know, she has not. And I don't. There's different theories in that, and we may get more from the new chip off data, but I actually don't think that based on the key cycle data and the vehicle data that she did make any trips between, say, 115 and 508 when she's backing out in the driveway. I do believe that it's the first time she backs out. And it's picked up by the ring video, her backing out. She goes out searching for John. She goes by the library and in the direction of the waterfall. I'm not sure exactly what time, 5:12, 5:15. It's shown in the case, and I don't remember. There is kind of a missing 20 minutes where the police believe she went back to 34 Fairview, but her location data was off on her phone. Now, not for any inculpatory reasons, it had been off for some time. So they don't know for sure. They looked at cell phone signal, and they only were able to establish that she is going in the direction of 34 Fairview. And there is that missing time. But there is also a strange phone message. So the last voicemail she leaves on John's phone is at 5:23. Now, people disagree about what she says. and I've heard different versions that sound a little bit different. There's one version that sounds like, John, where the fuck are you? But the most accurate version that I believe is her saying, John. No, I'm sorry. The one that was more suspicious but less accurate is where she says, John, is that you? But my interpretation of the one that was played in trial was, John, where the fuck are you? And that was at 5:23. Now, was she driving by the house at that time? Now, even if she did, that doesn't prove that she saw John. But interestingly, Lucky, the plow driver, who is a key witness for the defense, because he testified that he plowed the streets at 2:30 and then again at 3:30. And at 3:30, he said there was an SUV parked right in front of where John's body was, suspiciously sitting there with the lights out. I don't believe I believe he's confused and was manipulated by Karen's private investigator, because at 3:30, there was not enough snow to plow. So you need 2 inches of snow to plow. And if you look at the video of Karen pulling out in the driveway, there's about 2 inches of snow. In fact, I think you and I talked about this when we looked at on once before. And to me, there's about 2 inches of snow there, and it's snowing hard. So it's not like it had snowed earlier and then stopped. This is when the storm seems to have actually really gotten going around 4. And so by 5:08, when Karen's pulling out, there's a couple inches of snow there. So I don't believe Lucky was actually plowing at 3:30. But it does make sense. And in trial, he surprised the defense when the defense said, "What is the last time that you plowed Fairview?" And the defense lawyer thought he was going to say 6:30, which it's a ridiculous thing that he thought that, because at 6:30, the street was blocked off. Off for a couple of hours at that time. And Lucky told what I think was the truth. He said, "I last plowed it at 5:30. And I believe that that's the time. So he's around 5:30. So I believe he was plowing that street at about 5:23, and he saw Karen's Lexus sitting there with the lights out. But you can't prove that at this point. So unless there's some further data that comes out,
I mean, Alexis doesn't Alexis have a GPS on it?
Yes, Alexis does have a GPS chip on it, and we don't know if they got any further data on that. They did not for the first trial. They got 8 gigabytes of new data through a chip off this past December, and the only thing we know that's in it was hinted at by Attorney Brennan, Prosecutor Brennan, when he said, "We now have information of time and place." So place would indicate GPS, but we don't know if they had GPS for all her trips, or possibly it was just during the 2 triggered events that showed up in the vehicle data. We don't know. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I need to talk to my buddy Steve from True Crime Web. He's a former CSI guy, and he works a lot into that stuff. I'm going to ask him about that, if that can be pulled. I also got a buddy of mine that's in IT, and I'll ask him that as well to get that information. Because, I would have thought that would have been, pretty easy, simple thing. Did she go back? Check the truck. The truck. Check her phone.
This is why the Lucky testimony is potentially key. So let's say they do have GPS that shows she went back to the scene of the crime at 5:23. Again, I don't know of this evidence. That's hypothetical, but let's say they do have that, and she still leaves that message, "John, where the fuck are you?" That still doesn't show that she saw John, right? So the fact that she went down 34 Fairview in it by itself is not proof of consciousness of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. However, if you then bring in Lucky and he testifies, "Hey, I'm confused about what time. I thought it was 3:30, but I saw an SUV sitting there with the lights out." Well, if you could make a jury believe that it was Karen that was sitting there with the lights out, well, the fact that the lights were out, that's consciousness of guilt. That means she doesn't want anybody to see what she's doing. But at this point, it's a stretch to make that argument. But it's right. We'll see what evidence comes out in the trial.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, how is that gonna portray? Let's just say she did go back at 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:23, 5:30, before she showed up with everybody else. How is that gonna look? How do you think the Free Karen Reed folk would take that information?
Well, most of the Free Karen Reed folk have, even Turtle Boy has made clear this week. He said if Karen Reed took a plea and confessed to this, he still wouldn't believe it. He would say she's on drugs. And this really is a cult-like thing. If there was video that emerged of this event, an overwhelming majority of those people, it wouldn't change their opinion. They would find some way to say Trooper Proctor had manufactured that vehicle data and that video and blah blah. I mean, it's just it's like a religion now. It's at this level of belief, and they don't really care about the evidence, because the evidence that I've talked about with you that correlates the vehicle data with the location data on John's phone, that's more powerful, really, technically, than grainy video that might show the accident. That really is bulletproof evidence. But they just dismiss it. They don't even want to consider the fact that the GPS shows that John O'Keefe never went in the house. Just ignore it. So they just believe the parts that they want to believe. And that's what we're dealing with. Now that you're down, you've got a huge audience for true crime, and you're talking about publishing a book. You're going to come up against this again and again, where you may be covering a case and you say, if I take the conspiracy angle, this book is really going to sell and my channel's really going to explode.
Yeah.
So you'll be in that situation where you'll say, but I know this isn't the truth, so I don't want to exploit it.
Yeah, no, I kind of went through something like that. Not necessarily like that, where it was me choosing to try to do something shady. Back when WSU Kim was on, and then another guy came up named Dave, who was a University of Idaho student at one point, and he had some information, but his information ended up also not being accurate. Not that I thought he was being purposefully deceptive, it just wasn't accurate. The information he had was that he had apparently woken up that morning of November 13th, was getting ready to go to work, and he had seen people talking about the murders on his Snapchat video since like 9 in the morning. But come to find out, I made some calls, found out where he worked, contacted his boss, and I'm fairly positive he got Sunday confused from Monday. One of the first things he said, I should have picked up on it right away, is that he called in sick at 9 a.m. because he wanted to be with his fraternity brothers and whatnot. And I was like, your manager didn't say, what the heck are you talking about? What 4 people that got shot? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I should have picked up on that, but I didn't at that moment. I did later. And so that's when I started making phone calls and starting to figure out if this guy was not necessarily being deceptive, but maybe inaccurate. And that ended up being the case. But when that happened, we had put out there some things that he had said, because I thought he came out very credible. Man, I couldn't sleep, dude. I'll be honest with you. I couldn't even sleep just thinking about, the thought of, like, I don't know any of these folks that had passed away, and I didn't want to put something negative on their name that I didn't know for sure or anything like that.
Right.
And I couldn't even sleep, man. I had to take medicine and stuff. And I was like, when I found out that he was not accurate, I'll leave it at that. I went out. I put it out there. Like, look, this is what we found out. This is what happened. But for somebody to go out there and purposefully lie about things, or the example that I used beforehand in that video where I was talking about when I coined the term Proburger, there was I guess there was a file, right? And the file, the way I explained it, this had to do with the IGG. And the way I explained it was that the file came in one format and they had to change it to a different format. Similar to like if I got a WAV file and I needed to convert it to an MP3 file. It's still the same thing, but now I have 2 files instead of 1.
Right.
And so that's what I was explaining. And what I was saying was, I can be controversial and say, all right, boom, there's double the information and we don't know where it's from without the explanation behind it. And if I were to do something like that purposefully, I couldn't even live with myself, I don't think, with putting myself in a, where these people have lost their loved ones. This isn't like a movie or a TV series. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and that's all these, so many dozens of grifting YouTube channels on this case that have, like in the Karen Reed case, even people that are allegedly lawyers or former lawyers, like Melanie Little, and the way that, or even Bettero, who's now on this, the way that these people just casually throw out the names of witnesses and just accuse them of being murderers, despite the fact that there's literally zero evidence.
Mm,
But they don't have any sense of conscience at all about that,
mhm,
you know? Um, it's just stunning. I just found out today that someone else has a book out on the Karen Reed case, but it's this weird fictional book that has fictional private detective. I don't know if they're private detectives or police detectives investigating it, and it's just this massive conspiracy headed by this arch villain Jen McCabe. And it's fiction. Well, it
mm.
is of course the whole Karen Reed theory is fiction. But I just what kind of person just doesn't mind turning an innocent person into a murderer or into an arch villain? This was a former elementary school teacher who just been raising her 4 girls, who's never committed a crime before. And in their fevered imaginations, she's this arch conspirator that's showing up in the car with Karen in order to convince Karen that she did it. It's insane. I don't really know what other word to call it anymore, except that it's insane. And I can understand people that just know the superficial information and say, well, isn't that odd? But for people that follow this case closely and still believe that Karen Reed was the victim of a frame job, there's something not right with their minds. That's the only thing I can really think. I know if
Yeah.
that seems ungenerous, I don't know, but something's not working.
Nah, I mean it's to attack a victim family member is insane too. I mean, this buffer zone with the Karen Reed case, what do you think about it?
I think the judge is totally within her rights, and her job is to create the environment for a fair trial. And so people that are saying that this is somehow a diminishing of First Amendment rights. Well, the diminishing is so tiny that it's irrelevant. You're just basically saying you can't be standing within a block or 200 feet of the courthouse with a sign saying free Karen Reed. So yes, there is technically a diminishing of your First Amendment rights, but there also would be a diminishing of your First Amendment rights if you couldn't walk into the court holding that sign either.
Mhm.
And nobody, I don't think anybody would suggest you should be able to. So I think that the diminishing is so small that it's infinitely balanced off by the need to try to present a fair trial. These people can still go downtown and hold up their signs that Karen Reed is innocent. So no one's really, really, truly interfering with their rights.
Yeah, no, I get you. I mean, I've said this before when it comes to what I've learned, like in my law enforcement career and also in studies in criminal justice, is that you have the right to do whatever you want until your rights start to infringe on others. And in this case, Karen has a right to a fair trial. That means
Right.
also, even if that fairness goes against to what maybe she may want, she still has a right to that fair trial.
Right.
Um, let's get
And
some.
how would it be, Daniel, if it was the other way around? Like if these hundreds or thousands of people out there wanted Karen's neck
Exactly.
and they were a vigilante crowd, would they have the right to be standing, just feet away with bullhorns saying, lock her up, noose her up or whatever? No, we wouldn't want that.
No,
And so it's,
it goes both ways. Let's
yeah.
get a couple of these super chats. We got Karen becoming the newest member. Thank you, Karen. We have Mark with a 199 super sticker. Miss Doglover comes in saying, "Hey, Daniel and guest, thank you. One of the few sensible channels I still watch. I appreciate that." Ellen comes in saying, "I love your channel and agree with everything you say. I believe BK is guilty as hell, but you can't convince me that it can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Karen Reed is guilty."
I can prove it to you, Ellen. I can prove it to you.
To me, it's kind of like when I said with Brian Coburger, there was a few things that just kind of stuck out to me. Early on, the phone being off, the vehicle, him being out and about at that specific time, no alibi, and DNA. Those things just kind of stuck with me. But early on, it was the phone being off, boom, and him being out at that super weird hour, and this car being out there. Even the DNA, I had a question mark about it, but it was that phone. With Karen Reed's case, to me, it's the fact that there's pieces of missing taillight at 5:23 a.m. You can't explain that. It's not there when she backs into, John's car, briefly brushes up against it. They're not there in the ground. and the micro pieces of lenses on his body and his clothing tell me that, you have the two. That's the big point for me that says that she did it. Whether you can prove it beyond reasonable doubt, that's a good question that's going to come into court. Ellen also says any woman knows that those 53 voicemails Karen Reed left that night on John O'Keefe's phone knows that those are from a woman genuinely believing her boyfriend is effing another woman that night, not someone who knows she killed her BF. I'm not necessarily certain that's true.
Well, and I don't disagree with Ellen on that. It wasn't 53 voicemails. It was 53 calls. It was 5 voicemails. And I would agree with her that there's no evidence in those voicemails that she knows John is hurt or that she's been in any kind of an accident. So I do actually agree with Ellen. And a lot of people see, I always call it the way I see it. And so trust me, I will piss off everybody once in a while. And I feel like I'm not doing my job if I don't. So a lot of the people that are on the other side, the anti-free Karen Reed, they get mad at me pretty regularly because of things that I say that they don't fully agree with. But in those voicemails, there's no indication that she knows she's been in an accident or that John is hurt. Nor is there any indication that she's trying to create a false trail of breadcrumbs. For example, if she knew she had just killed John and she wanted to cover that up, she might have left in the voicemails something like, okay, John, I love you. I'm going to bed. There's some food in the fridge. I'll see you tomorrow. That's what you would do if you were faking it, right? But she didn't do that. She instead, you hear this anger. So I do agree that she thought that John was cheating on her. She admitted that John had never cheated on her, but she was one of those kind of very jealous girls. There's a history of that going back that won't be evidence in this case, but very, very anger management and has a problem with jealousy that goes back all the way to high school. So what do I think happened? I believe she may have even struck him accidentally and just didn't even realize it. But there is evidence she probably knew she struck something because the video of her getting home before she left those voicemails has been deleted. And the only person that would have incentive to delete that video is Karen. And so I'm going to guess that she pulls into the driveway at 12:36, 12:37, and she gets out of her car and she goes right to that taillight to look at it, which suggests she probably knew that she had struck something. Doesn't prove it, but it does, but at some point she says she goes to sleep. I believe that's on the couch, and I believe that's probably true. But when she wakes up at 4:30, something has changed. Now she does things that are inexplicable if she's innocent. She calls John at 4:38, and he doesn't answer. Now she freaks out. And the niece, the 14-year-old niece inside the house testified that this is at the point where Karen is screaming that something has happened to John, and Karen is being hysterical. So why would she just jump to that conclusion? Why wouldn't she think John was just still drinking or sleeping on someone's couch or hooking up? But something has changed. She now believes John is in danger. And she calls Kerry Roberts at 5 a.m. and says, John's dead, and then hangs up. Calls back a minute later and says, I think he's been hit by a plow. There is no innocent explanation for that stuff.
She leaves at 5:23 a.m. Is she still calling John, leaving voicemails?
So she leaves at 5:08, and she leaves the last voicemail she leaves is at 5:23. And that's the one, like I said, where she seems to say, John, where the fuck are you?
But before that, are there voicemails?
Looking. So the last voicemail is at 1:18 a.m. So there are 5 voicemails between 12:37 and 1:18. So that's where the burst of go ahead.
Are there phone calls between the time that from 5:23 when she allegedly says is that where the fuck are you, to the time that she goes and picks up her friends or Kerry Roberts or whoever? Are there any other more phone calls, or do they cease at that point?
No, they see the last one is at 5:23. Well, then she calls when she leaves that voice when they're arriving at the scene, and then she tosses her phone down, like I mentioned. So that would be the last call.
So then there was a change of behavior from the moment where she potentially went back there to the time that she picked up her buddies or Jen and
no, I wouldn't. It's because she was hysterical in the house, and she was hysterical when she arrived at Jen McCabe's house, and so she was hysterical at the crime scene. So
the reason why I'm saying this though is because if she was calling and calling and calling, and then she goes out there and sees him, Well, then now she doesn't need to call him. She knows what happened.
I know.
And if there's a moment there of 30 minutes that is more so than any other moment that night outside of the time when she was asleep, I think that points to something.
It would, except the calls largely, as far as I know, stopped at 1:18, with the exception of there was one call at 4:38. So there was that one call there, and then the other one at 5:23, and then the final call at like 6:05 when they're arriving.
So after she wakes up, is there a change in like accusations in voicemails?
It's after she wakes up. So after she wakes up, there's only one voicemail left, and that's at 5:23, and that's when she's on the road, and she's saying, "John, where the fuck are you?" The change in behavior is that after she wakes up, she has gone from when she goes to sleep, she believes John's cheating on her. When she wakes up, just a couple hours later, now she believes John is dead or seriously hurt. And what made that change? Right. Did she go out to the garage and look at the taillight and realize how bad the damage was? And now she's sobered up a little bit. So she's figuring it out. Something that seems to be most likely what happened to me. That she's figuring it out at that time.
Nina Drew comes in with a $1.99 super sticker. Rebecca Bruce gifts 1 Drunk Turkey Show membership. If you get the gift and check out the members only posts, you can get into the Discord. On your end, we have Miss Cara coming in saying, sorry, we spoke about it already, but did you speak about the Canton police audit from today? So good for justice for John. I'm not familiar with this audit. Are you familiar with the police audit today?
I didn't know there was another audit today, but I know that there was an audit that came out during the week. It was the Free Karen Reed people that insisted on this audit. They got the audit, and now they're not accepting the results because the results did not find any wrongdoing. They even went into things like the inverted video, and it turns out that other cameras in the station recorded video the same way. So it's just an older camera system. And it turns out actually that cameras record that way. And then they play it back differently. So like what I'm looking at right now, so I can see my face on the computer in front of me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And behind me, I can see this sign here. To my view, it's inverted. But to your view, it's not. And we take that for granted, but there's software that's recording this and then writing it so that everybody else sees it a certain way. I'm not a technical guy. Your technical friends can explain it better. But they've been doing this with cameras going back to before the digital age. They used to, in the older cameras, the good ones, put an actual mirror inside them. So it's another thing that looks bad, but really wasn't. And
yeah, exactly. I didn't think that was bad at all. Rebecca comes in with being a member for 6 months. My thing on it from the beginning is, all right, let's look at context of what's going on. So this is the first time that they're bringing in the murder weapon into a controlled environment. It's a blizzard outside. It's been snowing. It appears to be a blizzard. Even as the vehicle is pulling into the Sally Port, it appears that it's still snowing. Is that correct?
Yep.
So it was still snowing. So this is the first time that you get an idea of the vehicle and obviously the murder weapon for the first time in a controlled area. You know, I know that my argument was, what's the point of it being inverted? I mean, just uninverted. It's not like you're going to see the other side. You know, right. You're going to see the same side.
It's the same video.
Yeah, exactly. And then that documentary that you were in, it goes into a little bit further, and they say, oh, well, you can see Proctor in the corner. And I'm like, well, he's the lead.
Where else is he supposed to be?
Right, he's the lead
investigator. Is he supposed to be looking at is he supposed to be looking at the unbroken taillight?
Exactly. Like, I don't understand the argument there. It's like,
I feel embarrassed that you and I have to point that out to these people.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, do you need someone to point out to you that a police officer that's just had the murder weapon towed and the only damage to it is on the taillight? You need us to point out to you that that's where that officer is normally going to be looking at it when it arrives for the first time inside in indoor. So up to that point, they had only seen it outside, buried in snow.
Yeah.
And now they're getting their first look at it inside an indoor facility. Of course, they're looking at the taillight, but nobody on that other side, nobody, not one of them even seems to say, yeah, well, that's all right. That's not really weird. I don't understand what goes on with their brains. I don't really get it. And I feel bad like being insulting like that, man. But it's like, if you watch that and didn't ask yourself, hey, is it really weird that they're looking at that? If you didn't at least raise that question in your own mind, I don't know, man. The world needs ditch diggers too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll ask the Discord. Like I said, there's a lot of folks that follow me. About a good third of the folks that follow me that think Brian Cobberger committed the crime think that Karen Reed is also innocent. And so we have these discussions back and forth in the Discord on Karen Reed, and it's pretty, for the most part, civil. But yeah, to me, they'll tell me things like the video was inverted, and I'm like, okay. Like, then they'll tell me like, well, Proctor had access to the car, and I was like, he's a lead detective, right? Yeah,
he was looking at that broken taillight.
I mean, and then they're like, well, they what was the other one? They're like, oh, well, Proctor went back to the crime scene that morning. And I'm like, how is that suspicious? Like, I don't understand. And they're like, oh, well, he found pieces of taillight. And I'm like, okay, well, where did he find it? Is there a documentation? Were there other people out there? Was it like, there's more than just him finding it, Were there other pieces of taillight that were found not by him, by somebody else, maybe even before he found his? And if that's the case, then that should tell you that, if they found some pieces, that would lead you to believe that as the snow melted, you'd find more pieces. I mean, that's a conclusion that a child could make.
And I just want to say too, Daniel, to addressing those people in your audience that are entertaining the idea of there being a conspiracy here. I am not trying to be insulting of you, because if you've just taken a superficial look of this at this case, listen, I was where you are. So Turtle Boy was the one that published the defense theory, tried to pretend that it was an act of journalism, but it was the defense theory that was fed to him by Karen and her lawyers back in April of 2023. And having only that to go by and not having any other evidence or any other documents, I was like, wow, that some of this stuff looks really suspicious. The chief of police knows the family, and yet he's driving by finding evidence a week later. That's weird, right? Those injuries do look a little bit suspicious on John's arm, right? 227. Wow. If that actually happened, and if data is just data, then somehow Jen implausibly knew that before John was found. So I don't criticize people that are just taking that kind of flyover look at the case and saying, yeah, this looks weird. But what I ask is that people try to maybe have a little bit of learn the lesson that it's the job of a defense team to make something look suspicious, whether it is or it isn't. That's their job, to make every little thing look suspicious. And almost all of the things in this case that they try to present as suspicious turn out to have extremely ordinary explanations. So just have a little street smarts to know this is what defense teams do. And this is what people in YouTube that are just trying to make a buck will do. And just be aware of that. And so try to get the explanations. Don't just rely on Alan Jackson from the defense team or Turtle Boy to give you an explanation. See if there is. Like, I'll give you one quick example. I think you and I have talked about this, Daniel. So one of the things that Alan Jackson tried to make a big deal of in the trial, and that they had tried to make Turtle Boy tried to make a big deal of this for the year up to the trial, and Nick Rocco tried to make a big deal of this on me with Court TV, was that John's clothing was not entered into the state police evidence system, record basically the computer, until 6 weeks after John died. And everybody was, aha. And Alan Jackson in the documentary said, where is that evidence? Where is that evidence for that 6 weeks? What kind of dastardly were they planting microscopic taillight pieces in it? Did Michael Proctor have it in the back of his car for 6 weeks? Did he take it to the laundromat and get rid of the dog, the canine DNA? No, the explanation is completely mundane, and it just requires us to understand how it works. The defense team understands how it works, but they want to dupe you. How it works is this: in the state of Massachusetts, these cases are investigated. These investigations are run by the state police in conjunction with the local police. But those troopers that are become detectives, they're not working out of a state police barracks. They're working out of the district attorney's office. You've all seen the TV show Law and Order. It's the district attorneys that prosecute the crime, and the police are supporting them. So where would you expect the evidence to be stored? Next to the prosecutors. So there's a room inside the district attorney's office that, strangely enough, is called the evidence room. And only 2 troopers have access to that. And the troopers in this, they're specially designated. They're called, strangely enough, they're called the evidence troopers. The troopers in this case did not have access to the evidence room. John's clothing was brought in that day, and it was left to dry. And then a couple of days later, the evidence troopers transferred it to the evidence room, which is where it stayed for 6 weeks. But then 6 weeks later, it had to be sent out for specialized testing. Those labs are run by the state police. So that is the point where the evidence gets entered into the state police system. Because before that, it's in the evidence room at the district attorney's office. It's not being held by the state police. But only when it's transferred to the state police so they can do the testing on it, does it become entered into their system. And this is just, Alan Jackson understands this. David Yannetti understands this. By now, Karen Reed understands it. But they don't want you to, they don't want us to understand that. And this, and on and on and on, this is what goes on in this case.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a lot like what I see with Ann Taylor and Brian Cobberger's attorney, you know, not disclosing that there's other routes that can get to a certain area that Brian Cobberger most likely took to commit his crime. And saying that, like, for instance, there's this, when Brian Cobberger's phone turns on, he is about 10, 12 miles south of Moscow. And he's on I-95, and there's a road that leads out of Moscow on I-95, and there's some cameras there that don't pick him up. But that's not the only road that leads there. You can get out of the neighborhood that he was in and take some back roads and get around that corner and pop up where his phone turned on and not be in front of any cameras. And yet they're over here saying that it's exculpatory, just like the 7 minutes is exculpatory, and none of it is. None of it is.
Right.
Ellen does come back and say, you know, this is the problem. If Karen Reed figured it out and woke up, until then she'd thinking that John was cheating on her. How is that second-degree murder? In the manner that you explained it, it would not be second-degree murder. But I think that just because she didn't know shortly afterwards due to her intoxication doesn't mean that during the moment that there was intent. You know, it's kind of like saying that if somebody were to black out drunk and in their blacked out drunkenness, they purposefully committed a murder. Now they don't remember doing it the next day, but during the person that they committed the crime against was somebody they had a problem with. They got really drunk. They went to their house, shot them. It's on video, whole 9 yards. The intent was there. You know, the intoxication part, just because he doesn't remember it because of his intoxication or her intoxication doesn't mean that the intent wasn't there during the commission of the crime.
Right.
Now, I think it's going to be hard to prove, though. I think it's going to be really hard to prove.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as Ellen. I don't believe that second degree is proved here. Now, there are some other aspects of second degree where technically it is the case. So when Karen made the decision to put the car in reverse and slam the gas for several seconds so that vehicle reached the speed of 24 miles an hour, whether or not she knew John was there, technically that does become second degree, because it's the reckless endangerment aspect of the clause where you did something that you should have known or could have reasonably known might result in the death of somebody else. So technically she satisfies it there. But I don't think as a practical matter, you're probably going to get a jury to convict based on that. You would have to show some intentional decision. Now, the closest where you come to that, I would say, is to the extent that you believe that Karen, when she woke up at 4:30, put this together in her head, and she still did not call 911. That starts to get into second degree, because in theory, John could have been saved. And certainly, if you can prove that Karen went back to the scene of the crime, say around 5:23, saw John there, assumed he was dead, and then went and picked up the other ladies, so because she didn't want to be seen discovering the body, that would also be second degree because we don't know that John was dead at that time and she didn't take action. But that's not proven. So I agree with Ellen that at this point, second degree is a reach. It's a reach, barring any new evidence that comes out. So I don't disagree with Ellen at all.
Yeah, my thing is though is the reverse. And in my opinion, now I've investigated traffic accidents. I've investigated fatality accidents. I've investigated quite a few of them. And in my opinion, based on what I've seen as far as where the bodies landed, the description of what happened to her vehicle, as far as it appears that it hit a curb, at least.
Mhm. Yeah.
I would have believed that she swerved at him and sideswiped him during that swerve. Now, that reverse, and that shows intent to me. If she did swerve at him, that shows intent to me. And
Yeah,
so,
I don't think the swerve is. I don't think the swerve happened because it's not in the vehicle data. So what you might be seeing though is at the moment of impact, it went from minus 4.5 to plus 4.5 degrees.
no,
But
I
that was
understand that.
but that was from the impact. At least that's what the state is saying.
Right. No, I'm talking about where the direction of force had to have been coming from a vehicle that turned towards the lawn, in my opinion, at one
No,
point.
I don't think so because I think and I don't think the state is saying that. So I think what the state is saying is if you're going straight and let's just say let's take a human body out of this for a moment. And let's say you're going in a straight line in reverse and there's a barrel parked there. There's a barrel sitting there and you clip it on the corner. It's going to fire back at an angle onto the lawn. So I think the fact that John ended up on the lawn is not due to the fact that Karen was in any way heading in that direction. It's because she struck John in kind of a glancing blow, and that pushed him at an angle onto the lawn.
See, my problem with that is if he's being flown back like that, then that's what caused it. I think there's going to be more than that as far as the injuries that he has. They're going to be a little bit more severe than what he has.
I think the elbow was pushed. It hit the arm was out like in a defensive position like this, and it struck and then pushed into his body. So that because the car is coming through at a high speed and it's a heavy vehicle,
right?
And as it's coming through, it's pushed him here, and so you don't see. But you make a great point, and we've all wondered about. I've really agonized over this for the last year and a half. Why isn't there broken ribs? Why isn't there, But I think the torso was shielded by the arm, and the arm was also shielded by or cushioned by the torso.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I mean, those things are possible. I just feel, to me though, I think, and she may have not swerved to hit him. There's a possibility she saw him there and she swerved to get close, but she's drunk and she clips him. To me, I think it's a side swipe. But to get him that far on the lawn, I think there has to be a little bit more of a directional direction to it. Because, a side swipe might push you a couple feet, but how far into the lawn was he?
I think the estimate was, so he's about, well, it was reported that he was found 7 feet from the street. And I actually believe that's inaccurate. I believe the witnesses had a deceiving view of things because the street was only plowed at that time up the middle. So people got a false impression of where the curbstone was because of that. So because if you look at where the flagpole was and he was found just in front of that, that's a little bit closer to the street. So I believe he was probably 4 or 5 feet from the curb, but I think the testimony is about 7. And Trooper Paul for the state, I believe, estimated that he was like 12 to 15 feet from the impact, something like that. Don't quote me on this. I may be slightly off, but I think it was about 15 feet. That was the estimate.
Mhm.
that he more or less, not flew in the sense of airborne, but his momentum.
He
He was shot
moved.
at with a tremendous force that sent him in that direction.
Mhm.
I think.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, that's the part that's the question, right? I mean, I think that's the
Yeah.
part I think that makes everybody question this entire case more than anything else is the
Right.
injuries on his body. You know, I've
Agreed.
shown a homicide detective those
Yeah.
injuries. He agreed with me; they were not from a dog, but he struggled with it being solely from a car accident or from a car accident.
Right. Right.
Um, you know,
Right. You look at it and you see that he's got a head wound. And I remember trying to figure this out myself. And I
well,
was like, well,
the head wound part would match. You know, the eyes, the way they bulge out. I mean, that's an indication
yeah.
somebody getting hit very hard in the back of their
Right.
head,
Right.
or something very strong hitting them in the back of the head. It's the
Right.
arm, man. The scratches on the arm and stuff like that.
But
Now,
also, how would you get hit on the if the vehicle had hit the back of the head, which is not what the state is saying. But this is what I used to wonder, say over a year ago. If you had gotten hit on the back of the head, how could you not have other serious injuries to your shoulders or to your back? What position would your body have to be in that the vehicle would strike your head and not hit some other part of your body? But we now know that that's not the state's theory anyways. The theory is that he was just clipped in the arm and that the ground caused the head injury.
yeah, I strongly believe that the ground caused that. The arm injuries, though, the could that be from the an exploding taillight? I mean, I think so. I mean, if you have micro pieces in his clothing, that's a pretty
Mm,
clear indication that they were shot there. You know,
mm.
um,
We actually got a little bit of a hint, what we might find. So this time around, the state hired a really qualified independent accident reconstruction company called Aperture.
mhm.
And the defense was trying to get their main expert, Dr. Welcher, removed. And they talked about an experiment done with paint
Hmm.
and didn't get into details for it. But they were in, Attorney Alessi for the defense was trying to say, well, where's the scientific grounding for this? Where is the basis in the literature to justify that kind of experiment? So I don't know for sure what that is, but I'm just going to guess that they did something scientific and simple where you take off the corner of a taillight, the same model taillight, and apply some paint on to see there inside that housing. There are plastic pieces and ridges, part of the support structure. Put some paint on that, and then have that vehicle match up to use a dummy or use, I don't know, a stuffed bag or something like that, just to see if it could recreate that pattern of parallel lines on the arm.
Well,
But I'm just guessing on that. I don't know.
uh, that's interesting. And the tail light has the two fins on the side that are very consistent as far as the distance between them and the two lacerations that he has on his arm that are pretty prominent in my opinion. They look fairly
Yeah.
close to each other. Um, Ellen comes in saying, "So, how much weight do you give the FBI and Arcata data on this case?"
So it's a long story to go. I'm not going to go into this too much, Alan, but just because I could talk about it forever, but I would put Daniel to sleep. So the U.S. Attorney's Office, the feds. So it looks like you're in another country. So the U.S. Attorney's Office is the federal branch in this country of prosecution. Very, very powerful, very elite, and it's the FBI works for them. They're under their heading, and Karen Reed and her defense team went into the office of it's called First Assistant U.S. Attorney. So it's the person that's working right underneath the U.S. Attorney. And the U.S. Attorney in Boston is a big office. They've got 120 assistant lawyers. So this was the top assistant, a very elite guy. And they convinced him that there was something worth looking at here. So the feds launched a pretty significant federal investigation that included a grand jury. They subpoenaed the phone messages of all the people that this murder defendant named as suspects, which is really unusual, right? And they eventually hired this allegedly independent accident reconstruction company called ARCA. And ARCA produced a report a year ago, so in February of 2024, that said that they didn't think it was likely that a vehicle could cause the injuries on John. Is it now, if they're unbiased, that becomes a powerful piece of evidence, right? But ARCA was not given all of the relevant material, all of the relevant evidence. They were just given, the U.S. Attorney's Office got all of their evidence from the defense. They got nothing from the prosecution. They ignored letters from the prosecution. They didn't know what the prosecution's theory was. And a key piece, one of the most fundamental pieces of evidence for this accident reconstruction is the vehicle data from TechStream. Well, we don't know if the defense gave this to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They were required to, so they probably did. But for whatever reason, the U.S. Attorney's Office never gave that data to ARCA. So the ARCA guys had no idea that her Lexus went in reverse at 24 miles an hour. They had no idea about this key correlation that I've talked about between where you see this telltale sign of a pedestrian strike, and when you correlate that with the data on John's phone, we know exactly what time it happened within a couple of seconds. It happened a few seconds just before John's phone moved for the last time. But these ARCA guys didn't have any of that. And there's also a tremendous amount of evidence now that these ARCA guys were cooperating in an improper way with the defense team. They wanted to help Karen win her case. Why? We don't know. But it seems that there was there's also a lot of evidence that so this first U.S. attorney's name was Josh Levy. Not long after this, he becomes the U.S. attorney. He's the top dog. All right. The only person over him in the U.S. government is the attorney general in Washington, which is a cabinet level position, and the president, very high up position. But yet he's cooperating very closely with the defense team. There's shady stuff here that went on. So if you really want to look for a conspiracy and corruption, it's between U.S. Attorney Josh Levy, who is now out, and the Karen Reed team. And they somehow imparted on these ARCA guys the bias. The ARCA guys understood what the U.S. attorneys wanted, and they gave, and like any good company, they give the customer what they want.
Yeah, and they also got caught lying on the stand, didn't they? I mean, I think there was a point where they asked if they had asked the ARCA witnesses if the defense had spoken with them about the trial and all these other things, and they denied, and they ended up being not accurate. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. They tried to hide the fact that the defense was paying them. They tried to hide the fact that they had communications. These ARCA guys actually, in those communications, which some of them came out into discovery a couple months ago, showed Dr. Wolf from ARCA actually making suggestions to the defense team about how to avoid prosecution scrutiny. So the idea of presenting these guys as independent experts, no, they were not. They never were. They never were.
You think they're going to take the stand this time around?
Yes, I don't. The only reason that they would not would be if they have now had the chance to look at that TechStream data and they want to avoid embarrassment and say, okay, yeah, we were wrong. John was struck by a vehicle. But, that's not really human nature. Human nature, and these are intelligent guys. They're very qualified, intelligent guys on that side too, on the ARCA too. But it's human nature once you choose a team to want to keep fighting for that team, right? So no matter what the evidence. So I do think you'll still see ARCA testifying for the defense, but they're going to be in that position now of they will have seen that TechStream data, and they're going to have to explain that data, which could not have been manufactured. It couldn't have been.
Yeah. See, for me, I think that if I was the prosecution, I would highlight the inaccuracies of their testimony in the last case. I know that some folks are going to say, well, this is a different case, this is a different case. But if you can prove or say that, hey, you show that these people were inaccurate about what they were saying in this specific case about this specific trial or about this specific crime, what makes people think that they wouldn't, falsify or be inaccurate about other things in another trial? Now, unless they're willing to come out and say, hey, we made a mistake. He was hit by a car. If that ends up being the case, then yeah, hey, these guys are good to go. But if that's not the case, I would embarrass them like that as much as I can. I think that it would be a mistake not to what's the word I'm looking for? Recount that, because if they go in there again saying there's no way he got hit and all this other stuff, and there's evidence that they're looking behind or whatnot, if they were used in the prosecution of any other client of mine, like in the future, I would try to dismantle their credibility based on what happened in this case here with Karen Reed. What do you think?
Yeah, obviously I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. There are rules and laws and precedent that will apply to this. So we had the strange situation in the first trial where the judge had to inform both sides that you're not allowed to discuss the federal investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So we had this situation where the defense would be constantly trying to hint at it without saying it. So they would ask the Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rencho from ARCA, so in the independent entity that hired you, you know, because obviously, look, for an average person, for any person, if you're on a jury and you find out that the feds and the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office were so suspicious of this murder investigation that they did their own investigation into it, and that investigation was ongoing. It's not now, but it was officially ongoing up until a couple months ago. There was no sign that they actually were investigating it. They were trying to cover up hide their own wrongdoing by keeping it ongoing. But for a jury, if you find out that the feds were investigating the state police investigation into this in the prosecution, and the feds suspected them of cover up, well, that's almost reasonable doubt by definition, right? So the judge rightly ruled that they could not mention it because that would prejudice the jury unfairly. And I think that's going to continue this time. And I think that what we might see happen is that the judge decides not to allow the kind of conversation that you're talking about there, but where she instead says the defense is not allowed to call these guys independent. Just present them to the jury as regular defense experts. That's it. So let's not, so don't go into the origins. Don't go into.
But I don't like that because, a defense attorney will go into the credibility of a witness and tear them apart about something they did in their past. Even if they're a victim, talk about their clothing they may have been wearing to have excited their defendant or whatever the case may be. They can go in on credibility of a normal person. But when you have actual evidence that you have this company or these group of guys who are claiming to be one thing, and then there's inaccuracies in what they're testifying to,
right,
and
right.
flat out falsification, lying, that they had no conversation. I mean, there's no gray area there, in my opinion. Did you have the conversation with the defense about what they, any type of guidelines or any outlines of what they can or shouldn't or wouldn't would they say? I think, okay, that's one thing. That's huge. Now it's one thing if all they were going to do is like, hey, what is your background? What do you, what made you decide on this thought? If you're asking questions like that, okay, maybe. But if you're going into like actual strategy against the prosecution, that's a different story.
Yeah. So they might be able to bring it up. We'll see. I mean, it tends to become off the side, almost a trial within a trial. So I don't know if they'll try to avoid it. I want to just answer Ellen's question.
Yeah.
I think she asked, so do I believe there was a conspiracy between the U.S. Attorney's Office and Karen Reed and ARCA? Yes, but not in it's. I don't believe it started as a conspiracy. So I don't believe that the U.S. Attorney's Office knew that Karen Reed was guilty and tried, to help protect her for the sake of some other, maybe whether Josh Levy knew someone connected to Karen Reed or one of the lawyers. No, I don't believe that. I believe that the then first U.S. attorney and eventual U.S. attorney Alan Jackson was duped. Now, even intelligent lawyers can be duped. He was duped by Karen and her team into believing there was something suspicious here. Then once they dug hard into this. They called all the witnesses before the federal grand jury. They got all the data. They got all the messages. They even got warrants and got the content of a lot of the messages. And they found nothing. They found no evidence of a conspiracy. Zero. And what they lacked was the integrity to do the right thing, because it was embarrassing. It's embarrassing that it turns out that you launched this probe that the result of is interfering with a state's murder case, and you had no basis for launching that probe. You launched it because you were duped. So they dig in their heels, but it's to protect themselves. It's to try to save themselves from embarrassment and possibly save themselves from discovery of any wrongdoing, because there is evidence of a lot of wrongdoing. The feds generally are supposed to be, I'm sure Daniel has seen this, they're known as a one-way street when it comes to information. You give them information, you get nothing back. That's the way it's supposed to be. But Karen was getting a flood of information, including about when people were going to, these witnesses were going to appear before the federal grand jury. The accusation is, and there's some evidence for it, that they were getting this from some leak in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And you have all these inappropriate calls. You have the U.S. Attorney grilling these witnesses on the stand personally and using a blow-up of Turtle Boy's blog, TB Daily News, and doing this at the exact same time that mob, directed by Karen and her team, is hounding these witnesses. Now, there's no way that the U.S. Attorney's Office did not know about that. They knew the U.S. Attorney's Office lives for publicity. Headlines is what drives what they do. And so they're following, I guarantee, very closely this huge frenzy that's been stirred up by Turtle Boy. And yet, despite that, now the U.S. Attorney's Office should have said, "Wow, I got to distance myself from this." But he does not do that. He grills the witnesses himself, brings some of them to tears, and uses TV Daily News where they can see it, a copy of it. So there's something foul that went on here. But did it start out as a conspiracy between the U.S. Attorney's Office and Karen Reed's team? I doubt it. No.
You know, in the Richard Allen case, there was a psychiatrist who was following his case, who actually spoke to him and was telling him that there was people on his side and this and a third. Do you think that maybe there's just a free Karen Reed person in the upper office there?
Who knows, right? I mean, so the investigation, as late as this past January 30th, the U.S. Attorney's Office informed the parties that the investigation was officially ongoing. But then we had a change of administration, and as a result, Josh Levy was gone, and a new U.S. attorney takes the place. Her name is Leah Foley. And just 2 or 3 weeks after that, the defense mentioned in court how the investigation is ongoing, and it would seem that Leah Foley saw that, and under pressure from the new prosecutor, Hank Brennan, said, "No, I'm not going to let this go on anymore." So she reached out to the Canton Police, the Mass State Police, and to the Norfolk DA, and said, "We want to let you know the investigation is completely over, done, no further action, and no charges on anybody." To me, that's not enough. I believe that she had. So I want to ask you about this too. So I use an example a lot in the Brian Cobberger case. You had one of the girl's ex-boyfriends to co-own the dog. You had the food delivery guy, DoorDash, that came in just before Brian Cobberger, and you had the guy that seemed to be following the girls outside the food truck when they got out of the bar. These guys were mercilessly grilled in the media, particularly the British media, around this time. But as soon as they were cleared by the police, they were publicly cleared to take that heat off. That's the right thing to do. The police are not obligated to do that. Now, I don't know if that was the FBI making that decision. Maybe you can tell me. Or if it was the state police making that decision. These witnesses falsely accused in the Karen Reed case, the U.S. Attorney's Office could do the same thing. I guarantee they're sitting on evidence that clears them. They don't do it because they hide behind policy. But what they really don't want to, they don't want to be exposed to the wrongdoing that went on in their office over the last couple of years and the embarrassing stuff. So who authorized that clearing in the Cobberger case? Do you know that?
I would assume it was the chief of police. And the reason that they were clearing people was because of false accusations. I mean, there was a lot of false accusations that were going on. There was a lady who was accusing a professor and she ended up getting sued. This was a TikToker. She was accusing a professor of having some sort of inappropriate relationship, I think, with Jack Decor, one of the victims' ex-boyfriends, and she apparently put Jack up to it or something of that nature, I think is what it was. And she ended up getting the crap suit out of her because, well, obviously the person that she was attacking was a professor at a well publicized college, university, a big university. They pay him pretty good. And so she had also the professors and stuff. They have a I have family members who are professors and teachers. They have like lawyers on retainer through their union. And so, what do you call it? She got the living crap suit out of her. I wish more people would sue some of these people that are wrongfully accusing people of doing things. But because of so much of the false accusations out there, whether it was the teacher, the neighbor, the ex-boyfriend, the surviving roommate's boyfriend, whoever it may have been, because there was so much, they decided that they were going to try to douse the flames a little bit and put out some information about who was cleared and when they were cleared.
Right.
But I think that it helped out a lot, to be honest with you, because I think that if that was not there, like for instance, the DoorDasher, you brought that up. The DoorDasher was technically never publicly cleared, but that's because the DoorDasher wasn't known until after Brian Cobberger's arrest, and it was put in the PCA. And so obviously they're not a suspect. Brian Cobberger is. But there are people to this day who will say, well, they never cleared him. I'm like, yeah, they did. Just because they don't publicly come out here and say that they cleared him doesn't mean that they didn't. Like
I do remember them clearing the boyfriend.
Yeah, right away.
He was and I think they also clear the guy outside the food truck who was
Yeah, they cleared the food truck guy, the boyfriend, who else? The neighbors, and there was like about 7 people I want to say in total that they were like throwing out there that they cleared out. The teacher as well, the professor, because that was one that was getting a lot of publicity about.
And that's cops doing the ethical thing, but they are not required to clear those people. You know, they could just leave those people out there to take the heat for no reason. And I believe that I'm sure that in this case here in Karen Reed, if the feds were driven by ethical considerations, they would release any evidence that exonerates the witnesses that are falsely accused.
They didn't release any evidence that the Jack or any of these other guys,
or they made a statement. They made a statement.
But they did make a statement. Yeah. So I
the
mean, they
feds
could at least do that.
Yes, they could make a statement saying that these people, there's no evidence that they've part of any crime. They weren't, because I mean, right up until during the trial, we were joking every time sirens would go by, it's the feds, because the people in the Free Karen Reed crowd were saying almost every day, every week, the feds are coming tomorrow. You know, some of their big followers, like Sean in the Gulf, was February 15th. March 1st, March 15th, April 15th, it kept coming out. This is the day I have inside information. The feds are going to arrest everybody, the police chief. They're going to blow this whole thing open. And these people are gullible, and they just kept believing this stuff. And there's still, even though that the U.S. Attorney's Office has reached out to their partners in law enforcement and said it's okay for them to say that the investigation is over, a lot of people in this case on the Free Karen, they still believe the feds. No, they're about to swoop in any day now and arrest the McAlberts. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Ellen says that she still disagrees with ARCA, and it's more embarrassing than anything Proctor or Mass PD or the U.S. Attorney Office did, though. But here's the thing: just more than one thing can be true at the same time. There can be some embarrassing things that have happened with Proctor and Mass PD and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and there can be crimes that are being committed. I mean, somebody can go into this and say, "Hey, every case that has happened since Proctor's been a police officer, let them all out." Let them all out. I think there's this one guy, right, that's fighting it, who is in prison for, and this was kind of a big case. And a lot of these folks who are on the Free Karen Reed case were against this guy. I can't think of his name for the life of me, but his wife disappeared, and I think they found evidence of blood and stuff. And I think they have him put away, but Proctor ended up being the investigator that was investigating him as well. So let him free. There you
Yeah.
go, Walsh. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, all these other guys. I mean, apparently no crimes occur there. Not a single crime has occurred at that place, and every crime has been committed by the law enforcement there and police department. In fact, demolish it, abolish it, take it down, and just let the people police themselves.
There's no evidence, and despite incredibly rigorous investigations by both the feds and the state police, who both had their own reasons for wanting to get rid of Michael Proctor, there's no evidence that he ever in his career manufactured evidence, planted evidence, did anything wrong. What he did was make some very inappropriate and insensitive private text messages.
Yeah.
But I've said this to people too, if you want to distrust Michael Proctor's evidence, fine, throw it all away. If you want to, in this case here, I can't speak for other cases, but if you want to take all the evidence that Michael Proctor in some way collected and dismiss it, throw it out. Go ahead. Because the key evidence here was not collected by Michael Proctor. The taillight pieces were collected by the CERT team. The main pieces that were initially found were collected by the CERT team that night. Michael Proctor wasn't there. The vehicle data was gathered by Trooper Paul. The phone data was gathered by Trooper Garino. And that data correlates in a bulletproof way that shows what time Karen was struck. And neither one of those guys had access to the other guy's data. So they didn't even know about even at the time of the trial, they didn't know about that correlation. So there was no possibility for corruption here. And so I'm not blaming someone for being upset with Michael Proctor's messages, but there's actually no real evidence of it. There's no evidence of any corruption in this case, of any manufacturing, any planting, any deliberate wrongdoing. There's nothing. And there's not even really that much evidence that it was a bad investigation. It's a flawed investigation like every investigation. But there's not really, they more or less just went by the book, going through the procedure of gathering the things that they had to gather. And I think one more thing on this. In any case, there's going to be pretty much any case, there's probably going to be some evidence that looks a little suspicious or you have some doubt about. Don't dismiss it as you're looking at these cases. Put that to one side. Stack it up. Then the other side, stack up the evidence against the defendant. Now, if the evidence that you stacked up against the defendant is not very convincing or not fully convincing, or to the extent that it's not convincing, then that stuff over here becomes way more meaningful. But if that stuff that you're putting that proves the defendant committed the crime, if that stuff is very, to the extent that that's really strong, then this stuff over here just becomes odd stuff. So the Proctor stuff and all the other stuff that people are pointing to, it really isn't meaningful because the fundamental evidence in this case is bulletproof. And so you have to put the odd things in their proper context.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, at the end of the day, what got him fired, Proctor, that is that, he gave the department a black eye based on his private information being sent out there. That is actions on becoming an officer. I think he also put out their information to people that weren't part of the case or law enforcement period that shouldn't have known. And I think he was drinking on the job. None of it was planning evidence or framing or any of those type of things. Now, as far as what he said and those things, yes, I've said some things about the people that I've arrested. I arrested a guy who had assaulted his daughter and stepdaughter in a sexual manner. And I had some choice words about the man after I arrested him, to folks. I mean, I told people, I arrested that scumbag that lived on this street. That guy was a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old, that he was taking advantage of. And I said quite a few horrible things. I wasn't looking for pictures of him or anything like that. But at the end of the day, officers are held to a higher standard. Is it fair? No, but it is what it is. And, he lost his job for it. But, I don't see him being arrested for any of the things that we mentioned. Even officer, actions on becoming of an officer. I don't think he's being charged. I think he just lost his job.
He's not charged with anything.
Yeah. And I mean, the only thing that he did, I think, was the drinking on the job, which is what eventually did get him fired. And so two things can be right at the same time. Trooper could have had a spiraling, end to his career there. And Karen Reed could have hit her ex-boyfriend. I mean,
Right.
two things are obviously can be true at the same time in any of these cases, which is why I brought up then, well, I mean, if we're to look at this case and say that they didn't commit it because there's some sort of proctor did this or that, then you got to look at every case that he's done and release everybody, and and come in with that same attitude and say, hey, well, let's get Wash out there back on the streets. Let's go get all these other people, including those that Brian Albert arrested as well. And I mean, I believe he was part of a high unit, you know what I mean? High crime unit. So let's see those criminals back in the streets of Canton and in Boston, if you guys really want that. I mean, it'd be one thing if they found evidence of Proctor doing something that was an arrestable offense and they arrested him, but that's not the case.
Right. Exactly. And like I said, this goes back to people should just be a little bit skeptical about issues that are raised by a defense team. Now, listen, both Daniel and I would agree there are definitely false prosecutions in this country. There are prosecutions that behave unethically. But at least in theory, the prosecution's job is to get the truth. That is never the defense team's job. Never. The defense team's job is to create reasonable doubt. That's it. It's not their job to present the truth or get to the truth. So you're much more likely to get these weird false narratives from a defense team. And so we have to just know that that's a fundamental aspect of the way things work and have a little bit of skepticism. At least get both sides of the story. Wait for the explanations. I'm not saying there are innocent people that are charged and their lawyers are doing the right job at trying to perhaps find the real killer, or we should listen to them. We shouldn't just believe the police or just believe the prosecution. That's not at all what I'm saying. But have a little skepticism and understand that the prosecution can't try a case through the media the way that the defense team can. So often we have to wait until these explanations come in trial. And then even when they do come in trial, because it has to be presented through a witness, it might not always be that clear. So especially to people just kind of taking a glance at it. So then you have to find a source like Daniel that you trust to tell you the truth. If over time the source that you're looking at on YouTube is someone that doesn't seem interested in telling the truth because everything that they present is one-sided, you got to be skeptical of that source.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. There's one defense attorney that I've been watching here recently. I think his name is Scott. Oh man, True Crime Talk, something like that, I think. And I'm not sure what his take on Karen Reed's case is, but his take is on the Cobberger case has been spot on. He's the only defense attorney that I've seen so far that I've seen him be real. Like, hey, this doesn't look good. And a lot of the things that he's predicting in upcoming trial, I wonder what his thoughts are on the Karen Reed case. But have you seen anybody like that as far as defense attorneys for the Karen Reed case that are covering it that are bringing any attention to the things that you're saying, or is it all just conspiracy?
There are some. Well, first of all, on Court TV, I go on a lot with this guy Joe Krowski, and he's brilliant. He's entertaining to watch, brilliant lawyer. And there are other lawyers that I've seen on Court TV, and I'm sure there are probably others out there. I'm not aware of all the channels. Believe it or not, I don't follow any. I try not to follow any of the Karen Reed channels. I eat and sleep it enough that I don't. When I'm off the air, I want to watch something else. I watch science videos, history videos, things like that. Those are things that are more interesting to me. But there's a lot of ambulance chasers that know that they can capitalize on this to kind of, if you can build up your name or build up your channel where suddenly you have tens of thousands of people watching you, that's free advertising. And these lawyers, even like Dave, so David Yannetti for the defense, fairly elite lawyer, but he, right up until Karen Reed, most of his clients came through his website. That's how he got Karen. So these guys, they got a grind of a job. They're out there every day defending wife beaters and drunks and petty drug dealers and whatever. And it's not an easy job, and many of them struggle to even get what they get. But if you suddenly launch a YouTube channel and all you got to do is say, "I'm a lawyer," like look at like Melanie Little, she's not a criminal lawyer, but now she's got 100,000 followers.
Hmm.
She's not pursuing the truth. She's reported so many false things. She said the sneaker was missing. She said John's socks were falsely put on or something. His belt was missing. His hat was missing. None of those were missing. They all were produced in trial, and it doesn't make her re-examine any of the stuff that she's been reporting. So on and on, you can see she's not actually interested in the truth. She's interested in building her channel by being a hero to these people. And it's just going to get worse and worse as time goes by with these cases. We're all seeing people look at what's the guy that killed the health insurance guy, the Italian kid.
Mangione or something like that.
Mangione. And it's not that people are saying he's innocent, but they're saying he was justified, But people are going to be quick to turn so many of these defendants into heroes online. And I don't know. It's a dangerous phenomenon.
Yeah, it really is. I think there's a lot of the same people that follow a lot of these true crimes that are just in it for the conspiracy. Like I mentioned before, I think that when it comes to my channel and my audience, I would say a good third of those that think Brian Cobberger committed the crime are either on the fence or think that there's a good chance that Karen Reed is either innocent or can't be proven beyond reasonable doubt.
Right.
When it comes to the pro-burgers, though, they all think that Richard Allen's innocent. They all think that Karen Reed is innocent.
Everything's a conspiracy, right?
Yeah, everybody's innocent. O.J. Simpson is innocent. Casey Anthony is a hero now, apparently.
Yeah,
because she's joining the true crime defenders, I guess. I don't know, and it's insane. It's gotten insane. But when's the trial? Is it going to happen? I know that there's a Supreme Court case going on right now, or there's a question at the Supreme Court level about if they're going to be able to charge her with murder and other cases. Where's that at right now? Is that going to move forward? Do you know where that's at?
Yeah. So a few of the lawyers had come forward to reach out to Karen's defense team to say that inside the jury room, they were actually unanimous on charges 1 and 3. Charge 1 was leaving the scene of the accident. Charge 3 was second-degree murder, and that they were unanimous for acquittal. But there was no actual vote on that, and nor would there be, because the first thing was to decide charge 2, which is whether or not the Lexus actually struck John O'Keefe. And until you could get a unanimous decision on that, they really weren't going to vote on the other 2. But Karen Reed's team took an appeal on this to the state Supreme Judicial Court, and they lost. Then they took it to a federal judge, and they lost. Then they took it to the federal circuit court, and they lost. So now, as a last ditch, they're going to try to appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's probably a 1% chance that the Supreme Court will even hear the case. So it's definitely a long shot. And
well, that can take some time, though. Either way,
yeah. I would think that with the Supreme Court, the trial would be this second trial would be over. Now, we don't know if there'll be a decision. There may be another hung jury, so it's worth them pursuing that. So for other reasons too, and if Karen was convicted, and the Supreme Court ruled that those charges should have been dropped, that's going to lead to I don't know. I guess a new trial, I would think. But
well, it depends on what she was convicted on. I mean, if she had the conviction of the murder and the leaving of the crime, if it was all 3 of them, right? Murder 2, leaving of the crime scene, and drunk driving or manslaughter, whatever. Well, I don't think they would charge it. Well, because what's the one that they were undecided on? What was that charge again?
OUI manslaughter.
Okay. Because I don't know if you can have both, right? You can't be charged with manslaughter and murder, right? It's either or.
Well, she's charged with OUI manslaughter, leaving the scene of the accident, and second-degree murder.
That's crazy. Massachusetts has some crazy rules. I don't know. I mean, I know that out here in Texas, it'd be kind of difficult to charge somebody with like capital murder than also murder for the same person. You know what I mean? Right. So it'd be kind of difficult to do something like that. But rules are different and laws are different in different states.
Yeah. We are nuts up here.
I think the only thing that would work, I think, is if, let's just say she was found guilty on all three, then whatever sentencing that she would have gotten for the other two probably would be thrown out
Yeah.
because,
No. Actually, I do believe she'd get a new trial because
Mm,
they would argue that their trial strategy would be different if they were only facing count two.
oh, that's true.
So,
That is true.
so I believe that'd be the case. I'm not 100% sure. So, it's unlikely to happen. It's because it would open up a can of worms. Even if there is an intellectual point to be made that those jurors should have had they should have had the possibility of acquitting her on one of those charges or more,
Mhm.
and it should have been clear to them. But that was not clear to them. So you could make the case that the system should be reformed to reflect that. But to just reverse this now after 200 years of criminal history on this or more would just open the can of worms for so many other cases that I don't see any court being willing to change that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Do you think they voted that way? Like in your personal opinion, if do you think
So
they did?
I've been on two juries. They were not for cases like this, high profile cases. But in both cases, my experience is it's if you, and I never went through like an 8-10 week trial like this. The last one I was on was maybe 7 days. And that 7 days, is grueling. It's being a jury is tough work. You're sitting in that chair all day and, you grow a close bond with the other jurors. You're allowed to talk about anything but the case and you're locked in a room with them and you're going to lunch with them. And it's, and I think that it's natural that when you first get into that room, either the jury foreman or people just do it on their own, just say, let's take the temperature of the room first. And, I think they took the temperature of the room, and so people just kind of went like this. But that's not an official count, and we're only going by. In fact, I've heard of a juror that reached out to one of the victim's family, and she supposedly said that she voted guilty on all three.
Hmm.
So that contradicts what we're hearing from some of these juries that do seem to be free Karen Reed that ended up on the jury and probably should not have. So
Yeah.
we don't even know what unless you actually. And one remedy that the courts could have ordered is say order the judge to re-impanel the jury and question them.
Right.
But it's really too late to put this back together.
I don't think you can do that because they've
Yeah.
already gone home. They could have done their own research.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that could have
A lot of
happened.
problems.
Yeah. You can't do that. You can't put the toothpaste back in the
Yeah.
in the toothpaste tube.
Right.
Well, I mean, we're getting at the 2.5 hour mark.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for coming on, Kevin. It was a great conversation with you. A lot of stuff that I didn't know about the Karen Reed case. Every time you come on, every time we talk, I learn something new. I'm looking forward to this trial. When is the official date that it's supposed to begin? When's opening statements again?
So it's not scheduled yet because they're still trying to get the jurors. They need to impanel 16 at least. And they were off to a good start. By Friday, going into the morning, they already had 10. But by the end of Friday, they still had 10. They had lost one and gained one. So looks like they're going to need at least 2 more days of impaneling the jury. And then they'll announce when the start of the trial will actually be. And for people watching here from Daniel's channel, you can know that we'll be covering the case. Daniel will be with us a lot of these days when he's not getting medical treatments and whatever else he's got going on. But we have Daniel, we have Kate Peter, expert on this case. We have Jen Coffeneffer, retired FBI. John DePietro pops in a lot, reporter John DePietro. Matt Doherty from Boundless Millennial, very entertaining videos. So we have a really good panel, and there's usually 3 or 4 of us on. And so we'll be covering the case. I have my own, a little bit different this time. I have medical treatments that'll be going on through the first few weeks of this, most of them in the early morning. But I have people to help me cover it. So Kate is going to open it through my channel as well as, so you'll be able to see it through my channel, her channel, I think Daniel's channel, if he still wants to do it. And Jen Coffin channel, Matt Doherty's channel. So there are multiple channels that we're all in on, and you'll be able to get continuous coverage of the trial on it.
Yes, yes. I'm actually doing less wound stuff now, so I can actually probably make more of them. I
right.
was seeing my doctor every Tuesday and Thursday, and now I think it's like once every 2 weeks. Sometimes I got like some physical therapy sprinkled in here and there, so I got to make sure that that's there. But yeah, I plan on doing a lot more and getting more on, especially for this trial. I'm hoping it starts soon, because I do have another job that I do work full time, and I think I'll probably be heading back to that in the next 5 weeks, guys. So schedule might go back to a little bit different, once that happens. But from here to there, yeah, I'm all in,
All right,
looking
good.
forward to it, and looking forward to this trial. I didn't see the first one. I saw maybe about 15% of it. And the reason why, and I know a lot of people are going to come in here like, oh, how can you talk about this case if you didn't watch the trial? To me, the trial has always been a biased opinion one way or the other. This time I'm watching it because I'm now invested. I've looked at the evidence and I want to see what's the outcome. Last time I hadn't looked at the evidence. So the only thing that I would have gotten would have been a biased opinion of the evidence, whether it be from the prosecution or the defense. And so this time around, what I did was I looked at just solely the evidence. I didn't look at or listen to hardly any prosecution or defense's explanation of it. I took my own interpretation, and that's where I've come to my own understanding of this case and my own opinion here. I used to be a police officer, and so when I was investigating crimes on the street, I didn't have the luxury of a trial to go watch to make sure that it was being conducted beyond reasonable doubt. I had to look at the evidence and form my own opinion and critically think on the evidence to determine what happened in those situations. And that's the approach that I've done with this case as well. And so I'm looking forward to this one. I want to see what it is that Hank Brennan is going to be presenting, how he's going to be presenting it. I'm looking forward to actual presentation of how they suspect that John was hit, and some more of the actual evidence coming from the vehicle, some hard evidence that's undeniable.
Yeah, we're watching two of the biggest star attorneys in the country going head to head in this case. So attorney Hank Brennan is normally a defense attorney, but he's become the special prosecutor, but he's considered top 100 in the country for attorneys. And Alan Jackson is a superstar celebrity kind of attorney. So it's going to be quite a battle. Of course, a trial could be tedious watching because there's a lot of stuff you have to get through, but this is as good as it gets.
It definitely is. And check out the book. We have it here. I have the link in the description. I have it pinned here. As soon as the show ends, I'm going to pin it also in the comment section so you guys can go check out. It's called Storm of Suspicion. And then go and check out Yellow Cottage Tales, the YouTube channel. It's also linked in the description. You won't be disappointed. Kevin, I appreciate you again.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to be back on either tomorrow night or I'm going to be back on Monday. There's actually a case that occurred here in San Antonio, Texas. A young lady lost her life. She was found in a bush with a machete in her heart or in her chest. And, initially, I think a lot of people thought the boyfriend, but no. And it's unsolved. Nobody knows anything that's going on. It happened not too far away from here. So I'm actually going to go out to the scene, take some video of where she was discovered so that people can get an idea of the area and what and stuff. So stay tuned for that, guys. That's going to be the next one that I'm going to be talking about. But until the next time, you guys have a great night. Peace out.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks.